Today, the book that I'm reading, or the book that I'm gonna read, is known as Animal Farm by George Orwell, and it is a 117 around that page book. And before reading, I'm gonna do the little introduction of the author, George Orwell. So George Orwell, English novelist and poet. Okay, Eric Arthur Blair was an English novelist, poet, essayist, journalistic, and critic who wrote under the pen name of George Orwell. His work is characterized by lucid prose, social criticism, and opposition to all totalitarianisms and support of a democratic socialism. So his real name is Eric Arthur Blair. Okay, Eric Arthur Blair was an English novelist. He was born in Motihari. I think, yeah, he was born in Kolkata, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, he was born in he was born in Bihar, the current day Bihar. Back then, I think it was known as Bengal. Motihari is a city and headquarters is Champaran district in the Indian state of Bihar. It is located 80 kilometers west of the Muzaffarpur. Okay, Muzaffarpur, 150 distance of capital Patna. Okay, so he was born in India and died. He died in University College Hospital, London, influenced by Aldous Huxley, Charles Dickens. Charles Dickens. Okay, why do I feel okay? Charles Dickens, right? Okay, he's a journalist. Okay, Charles Dickens was a journalist. Charles Dickens was an English writer and journalist. He created some of literature's best known. Okay, so I think George Orwell is a very famous person, right? So he was born. Okay, he died very young. He died. He was born in 1903. 1903, and he died 1950 at the age of 46. And what is George Orwell famous for? George Orwell is one of the world's most influential writers, the most visionary author of The Animal Farm and 1984, and Eyewitness, a non-fiction classic Down and Out in Paris and London, The Road to Vegan Fear, and Homage to Catalonia. Catalonia, could be Spanish, okay, Catalans, right? Okay, so I don't know about that. But yeah, now I'm gonna read his. I've heard about him a lot of time, and I've started to know him from Samir Raina's one of his reel, right, where he talks about he was in a situation where because of some because of the show that he has made, that is the India Got Latent, he invited some other podcaster, Beer Biceps, and they made some jokes, which we could argue about was that a good joke or not. But keeping this aside, there was no need of interference from the state, but there was, and they had a lot of FIR filed against them. And in a Samir Raina's special, he there, I think he talked about it, that he had a two choice: first to say sorry to all the people who are hurt, or the other one where there could be some consequences. And he says that he had two options that time. And then he remembered the line from George Orwell stating that every tiny joke is a small revolution, and the revolution must never stop. I repeat, every small joke is a tiny revolution, and the revolution must never stop. But later he makes jokes of this, that he did say sorry and all those things. Yeah, but I'm just giving you a little context of how I got to know about him, George Orwell. And then later, when I started reading more about different topics, and especially when I started flirting with the English literatures, then I got to know that a lot of people are very they're very very they think that they mostly read the George Orwell, and most of the people are very they gave me very positive feedback about you should definitely read it. So I'm going to read George Orwell's first book. My first book that I'm going to read. It's known as An Animal Farm. And before, I have a habit that before going deep into any book, I read about the first author, and then I read about the summary, right? The summary to get the to ensure that I don't waste my time. So I just read the summary, entire summary, and then I decide whether do I have to go inside or not. So yeah, first let's read about the summary, and then based on that, I'll decide whether to read or not. So George Orwell, and his other famous book is also 1984 that I think and I shall read it later. 1984, George Orwell. So he is an English novelist, and he's very famous. And was George Orwell. His mother, with a French native, was the daughter of the team merchant in Burma. Okay, most infamous quote: "Big Brother is always watching you. War is peace. Freedom is slavery." Okay, why? War is peace. Freedom is slavery. Ignorance is strength. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the past controls the future. Who controls the present controls the past. And what did George Orwell think of India? George Orwell, born this once in India, was a fierce anti-imperialist critic of the British rule in India. While his initial work in the imperial police made him complicit in colonial authority, his experience bred in a deep contempt for the hypocrisy and the systematic oppressions in inherent British Raj. So he died in 1950. That means he must have seen the independence of India. So I'm going to read about the summary, right? Okay, George Orwell goes to Animal Farm summary. Animal Farm summary. Old Major, a prize-winning, okay. Old Major, a prize-winning boar, gathers the animals of the manor farm for a meeting in a big barn. He tells them of a dream he has had in which all animals live together with no human being to oppress or control them. He tells the animals that they must work towards such a paradise and teaches them a song called Beast of England, in which his dream vision is lyrically described. The animal agreed major visions with a great enthusiasm. When he dies only 3 nights after the meeting, the three young pigs, Snowball, Napoleon, and Squealer, formulate his main principle into a philosophical called animalism. Late one night, the animals managed to defeat the farmer, Mr. Jones, in a battle. Running him off the land, they renamed the property Animal Farm and dedicate themselves to achieving a major dreams. The card horse boxers devote himself to the cause with a particular zeal, committing his great strength to the prosperity of the farm and adopting as a personal maxim the affirmations, "I will work harder." At first, Animal Farm prosper. Snowball works at teaching the animals to read, and Napoleon takes a group of young puppies to educate them in the principle of animalism. When Mr. Jones reappear to take back his farm, the animals defeat him again in what comes to be known as the Battle of the Cowshed and take the farmer's abandoned gun as a token of their victory. As time passes, however, Napoleon and Snowball increasingly quibble over the futures of the farm, and they begin to struggle and with each other for power and influence over the future of the farm. And they begin to struggle with each other for power and influence among the other animals. Snowball concocts a scheme to build um, an electricity generating windmill, but Napoleon solidly opposed the plan. As at the meeting to vote on whether to take up the project, Snowball gives a passionate speech. Although Napoleon gives only a brief retort, he then makes a strange noise and 9 attack dogs, the puppies that Napoleon had confiscated in order to educate, burst into the barn and chase Snowball from the farm. Napoleon assumes leadership of the animal farm and declares that there will be no more meetings. From that point on, he asserts the pigs alone will make all the decision for the good of every animals. The animal farm. Napoleon now quickly changes his mind about the windmill. It's okay, just wait. Okay, and which of the windmills? Let's look at this one. Okay. Mr. Okay, just wait, where was I? Napoleon now quickly changes his mind about the windmills, and animals, especially boxers, devote their effort to competing ones. One day after a storm, the animals find the mill topple. The human farmers in the area declare smugly that the animals made the walls too thin, but Napoleon claims that Snowball returned to the farm to sabotage the windmill. He stages a great purge, during which various animals who had allegedly participated in Snowball's great conspiracy, meaning any animals who opposes Napoleon's uncontested leadership, made instant death at the teeth of the attack dogs. With his leadership unquestioned, Boxer had taken up a second maxim: Napoleon is always right. Napoleon begins expanding his power, rewriting history to make Snowball a villain. Napoleon also began to act more and more like a human being, sleeping in a bed, drinking whiskey, and engaging in a trade with neighboring farmer. The original animalist principle strictly forbade such activities, but Squealer, okay, Squealer, Napoleon A propagandist who justifies every action to the other animals, convincing that the Napoleon is a great leader and is making things better for everyone, despite the fact that common animals are cold, hungry, and overworked. Mr. Frederick, our neighboring farmer, cheats Napoleon in the purchase of some timber and then attacks the farm and dynamites the windmill, which had been rebuilt at a great expense. After the demolition of the windmill, a pitched battle ensues during which a boxer receives a major wounds. The animal routs the farmers, but boxer injuries and weakens him. When he later falls while working on a windmill, he senses that his time has nearly come. One day, boxer is nowhere to be found. According to Squealer, boxer has died in a piece after having been taken to the hospital, praising the rebellion with his last breath. In actuality, Napoleon has sold his most loyal and most long-suffering worker to a glue maker in order to get money for whiskey. Years pass on Animal Farm, and the pigs become more and more like a human beings, walking upright, carrying whips, and wearing clothes. Eventually, the seven principles of animalism, known as the Seven Commandments and inscribed on the side of the barn, become reduced to a single principle reading all animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than the others. Oh, I've read this somewhere. Some animals are more equal than others, okay? Ah, man, some animals are more equal than others. I've read it somewhere. I think I've read it yesterday when I was reading Hindu in Hindu Rashtra by Anand Ranganathan. Some animals are more equal than the others. Napoleon entertains a human farmer named Mr. Pillingtonst at a dinner and declares his intent to ally himself with the human farmers against the laboring classes of both the human and animal communities. He also changes the name of the animal farm back to the Manor Farm, claiming that this title is the correct one. Looking in at the party of elites through the farmhouse windows, the common animals can no longer tell which are the pigs and which are the human beings. So this is the central conflict of Animal Farm arises. The central conflict of Animal Farm. The central conflict of Animal Farm arises when the animal desire for freedom and equality is corrupted by the consolidation of a political power amongst the pig. The animal original goal is to express in the first chapter in the old major teaching and especially in the Beast of England. The animal's original goal is expressed in the first chapter in Old's major's teaching and especially in the Beast of England. The song is the song that becomes the anthem of Animal Farms. At the beginning of the novella, political power is embodied by the farmer, Mr. Jones. So Mr. Jones is the first owner, farm owner, and he's a human who indulge himself in the wild animal starves. Okay, the animals win easily when they rebel against Mr. Jones, and as a result, they make the mistake of thinking they have overcome political power itself. In reality, they have only overcome one of the forms that political power can take. By the end of the chapter number 2, when Napoleon steals the cow's milk, the political power become embodied by the pigs. Chapter number 2 to 7 traces the developments of the pigs' powers and other animals' growing awareness that they have not achieved their goal after all. The pigs and the Napoleons in particular come to embody political powers in three ways. First, they claim more and more of the farms, ready resources for themselves. They started by stealing milk and apples, and eventually sell the animals' product to buy them, buy human luxuries like whiskey. Second, the pigs become more violent, introducing the dog police first, and ordering executions. That the pigs claim the power to determine what truth is. Squealer changes the commandments of animalism in the story of the Battle of the Cowshed. Meanwhile, the animals slowly come to realize that their lives are no better than they were before the rebellion. Right? The climax of the novella, occurs in chapter number 7 when Napoleon decides to sell the hen's egg. The hens finally recognizes that the pig are the antagonist and the rebel. The rebellion is brutally crushed and then hens are executed. Now, Boxer is the only character still clinging to the hope that freedom can be achieved. He has worked tirelessly to achieve this goal set forth by old majors, which for Boxer is represented by this hope of one day retiring to a special pasture. However, when the time comes for Boxer to retire, he's sold and killed. Boxer's betrayal marks the moment in which political power, embodied in the Napoleon and the pigs, completely defeat the animals. In Animals Farm final pages, the animals watch the pigs dining with the human farmers, and they are unable to tell the differences between humans and the pigs. The pigs have become one of the human farmers because both groups are equally corrupted by the reality of the political power. But I am actually curious to know why he specifically chose pig. Why? And just wait. Okay, so I'll just do some of this ones. Okay, perplexity. Characters of people. Characters included in Animal Farm by George Orwell. From Spain. Napoleon, Berkshire Boar, who becomes the farm's dictator and symbolizes Stalin. Okay, so it's not like he's a complete fiction. I think he has given some reality touch, also reality story with some humor. Here's a list of the main characters in George Orwell's Animal Farm, with a brief note on one each. So Napoleon, a Berkshire Boar. Okay, what is Berkshire Boar? Boar means it's like a wild pig. Berkshire, okay, Berkshire, okay. Berkshire, officially the royal county of the Berkshire, is a ceremonial county in the south. Okay, so it's a county, Berkshire Boar, BOAR. Okay, boar. It's a Berkshire pig. So this is how it looks. What is the differences? Okay, what is the differences between IMAX? No, okay, pig and a boar, right? A boar. A boar is technically any uncastrated male pig, but in general uses the term refers to the undomesticated, okay, wild species. Yes, boar, it's a wild animal, right? Uncastrated, okay, uncastrated. Castrated meaning? Castrated. Castrated means the surgical removal or destruction of a male's testicle. The male castrated. Castrated means the surgical removal or destruction of the male testicle. The male gonads. This process permanently prevents reproduction and causes a dramatic drop in sex hormone like testosterone. So animals, often referred to as a neutering or gilding, is done to prevent breeding and make animal more docile or easier to manage. Example: horses, dogs, or cattle. Okay, so boar is technically any uncastrated, okay, that means undomesticated male pig, but in general use the term refers to undomesticated, okay. And okay, character first equals to Napoleon, a Berkshire, okay, Berkshire boar, who becomes the farm's dictator and symbolizes Stalin. So that time, I think he, 1904 to 1956, he was, 1950 he died. In the 46 years, I think the Stalin was the leader, during the initial first for the world wars. Stalin was the president of the USSR. So yeah, a Berkshire boar who becomes the farm's dictator and symbolizes Stalin. And then comes a snowball, a vivacious, inventive boar, an early leader who is later exiled, represents Trotsky. Squealer, a small, persuasive porker who spreads Napoleon's propaganda. Squealer. Old Major, the prize middle white boar whose speech inspires the rebellion and ideological founder. Okay, so he is an ideological founder. Napoleon, Snowball, Squealers, Old Majors, and Boxer, a strong, hardworking cart horse, loyal but naive, hardworking cart horse. Okay, cart horses. Okay, so this is how who is this. Okay, so Boxer is equals to Boxer. I thought he's a dog man, character dog. A strong, hardworking cart horses, loyal but naive. Clover, a motherly cart horse, and Boxer's friend. Okay, a Benjamin, cynical old donkey who understands what's happening but is largely passive. Benjamin. They've given a Benjamin name to a donkey. Okay, cynical. Okay, old donkey who understands what's happening but is largely passive. Molly, a vain mare who prefers human attention and ribbons. Okay, mare. Okay, and Molly. Moses, a tame raven who tells tales of sugar candy mountains, religious allegory. Okay, first of all, what is allegory? Right. Okay, allegory means it's like comparison or something. If I'm not wrong. An allegory is a literary or visual device where a story, poem, or picture is used to reveal a hidden, deeper meaning, most often moral, political, or philosophical lessons. It functions as an extended metaphor where characters, settings, and events act as symbols for the abstract concept or real world. Okay, George Orwell's Animal Farm. Key examples. On the surface, it is a story about the farm animals overthrowing their human farmer allegorically. That's allegorically. Allegory, right? Okay. Allegory. Okay, allegorically. Allegorically, it represents the events leading up to the Russian Revolution and the corruptions of the Stalinism. Okay, Stalinisms. Plato's allegory of the cave. Prisoners change in a dark cave, mistakes shadow for the reality. It is a philosophical allegory representing the journey to enlightenment and the human struggle to perceive the ultimate truth. Aesop's fables. So the allegory means something or the story which is representative of an ideology or a poem. Okay, allegory is a literary or a visual device where a story, poem, or a picture is used to reveal a hidden. Okay, where a story allegory is equals to story, picture, or poem is used to represent a hidden deeper meaning. Okay, so allegory. Okay, an allegory is a literary or a visual device where a story, poem, or picture is used to reveal this first. Okay, so okay, allegory. And okay, Muriel, a white goat who can read more than most animals. And the dogs, okay, raised by Napoleon to be his private enforcers, including puppies used as a guard dogs, okay, raised by the Napoleon to be his private enforcers. The sheep used to drown out dissents with chanting and to enforce conformity, used to drown out dissents, okay, drown out defense chanting with defense. Hence, producers of the eggs who briefly rebel against the pig's policies. Minimus, a pig who composed songs and poems praising Napoleon's, okay. Mr. Joan, the drunken farmer, human farmer who, overthrown by the animals. Mr. Pilkington's owner of the Foxwood, a neighboring farmer who would later allies with Napoleon. Okay, Pilking, okay, P-I-L, Pilkington's owner of the Foxwood. Mr. Frederick, owner of the Pinchfield, a neighboring farmer who betrays and attacks the farm. Okay, so there are Pilkington. Okay, so this one stand the Mr. Whymper, a human solicitors, the pigs hired. Okay, the Whymper, Mr. Whymper, a human solicitors, the pigs hired to handle trade and negotiations. If you want, I can create a compact table comparing each derived characters, allegorical counterparts, and the role in the plots. Would you like that? No, I want to know why. Why did George Orwell particularly chose pigs as the leaders, or as the leader? Yeah, why? Could have been anyone, right? I would say that the smartest, or it could have been they are in a farm, so I don't know. Orwell likely chose pig because they fit the role on several levels. They are widely seen as intelligent. Oh, I don't know. Are they intelligent? They can be greedy and self-serving, and in a farm setting, they naturally stand out as the animals most capable of organizing and controlling the others. An animal farm that makes them strong symbol for political leaders who start with the ideals and then become corrupt. Why pigs work as leaders? Pigs are smart enough to plan, persuade, and manipulate, which fits the pig usage of the propaganda and the controls. They have a negative cultural image, so using pig adds a sense of a moral decay and corruption. So Orwell also wanted an allegory for the Soviet revolutions, and the pigs represents ruling the communist elite. Literary effects. So using pigs makes the story simple to follow, but simple in a still politely sharp. The contrast between the pigs and the hardworking animals helps show how the power can shift from equality to dictatorships. Okay, now I'm going to go and read the poem. And yes, the poem consists of 124 pages. So we have 8 chapters and introduction. Animal Farm is an allegorical. Okay. Introduction. Animal Farm is an allegorical novella by George Orwell, published in England on 17th August 1945. According to Orwell, the book reflects events leading up to and during the Stalin era before World War II. Orwell, a democratic socialist, was a critic of Joseph Stalin and hostile to Moscow-directed Stalinism, especially after his experiences with the NKVD and what he saw of the results of the influence of the communist policy: ceaseless arrest, censored newspaper, brawling hordes of armed police. Communism is now a counter-revolutionary force. During the Spanish Civil War, in a letter to Yevgeny David, Orwell described Animal Farm as his novel Country Stalin. The original title was Animal Farm, a fairy story, but the subtitle was dropped by the US publisher for the 1946 publications, and subsequently all but one of the translations during Orwell's lifetime omitted the additions. Other variation in the title includes a satire and a contemporary. Satire. Orwell suggested for the French translation in the title, this one's okay, recalling the French name of the Soviet Union, Union, the Republic Socialist, okay, all those things. And the Time magazine chose the book as one of the 100 best English language novel. It also places at 31 on the Modern Library list of best 20th century novels. It won a retrospective Hugo Award in 1996, and it's also included in the greatest books of the Western world. The novel addresses not only the corruptions of the revolutions, by its leaders, but also how wickedness, indifference, and ignorance, greed, and myopia destroys any possibility of a utopia. While this novel portrays the corrupt leadership as the flaws in a revolution and not the act of revolution itself, it also shows how potential ignorance and how indifference to problems within the revolution could allow horrors to happen if a smooth transition to a people's government is not achieved. Significance: the horn and the hoof flag described in the book appears to be based on the hammer and sickle. In the Eastern Bloc, both Animal Farm and later also 19th century, four were on the list of forbidden books until this one's in the novel Battle of Windmills is referred by the Sand as one of the important episodes which constitutes the essence of the plot of the novel. Harold Bloom writes the Battle of the Windmill rings a special bell, the ripples of the Duke of Brunswick. Okay, so there's a copyright and introductions. No, okay. Now, chapter number 1. Mr. Jones. Okay, he's the owner of the farm. Mr. Jones of the Manor Farm. Okay, Manor Farm. Mr. Jones of the Manor Farm had locked the hen houses for the night, but was too drunk to remember to shut the pop holes with the ring of light from his latrine dancing from side to side. He lurched across the yard, kicked off his boots at the lack in the back door, drew himself at last a glass of a beer from the battle in the scullery, and made his way to a bed where Mrs. Jones was really already snoring. As soon as the light in the bedroom went out, there was a stirring and fluttering all through the farm buildings. Word had gone around during the day that old Major, the prize middle white boar, had had a strange dream on the previous night and wished to communicate to the other animals. So that is the old Major, okay. It had been agreed that they should all meet in the big barn as soon as Mr. Jones was safely out of the way. Old Major, so he was always called, though the name under which he had been exhibited as was Willingdon Beauty was so highly regarded of one of the farm that everyone was quite ready to lose an hour's sleep in order to hear what he had to say. At one end of the big barn, on a sort of a raised platform, Major was already ensconced on his bed of straw under a latrine which hung from a beam. He was 12 years old and had already lately grown rather stout, but he was still a majestic-looking pig with a wise and benevolent appearance in spite of the fact that his tushes had never been cut. Before long, the animal began to arrive and make themselves comfortable after their different fashions. First came the three dogs, Bluebell, Jessie, and Pincher. Okay, these are three dogs. Okay, Bluebell, Jessie, and Pinchers, and then the pigs who settled down in the straw immediately in front of the platform. The hens perched themselves on the windowsills. The pigeon fluttered up to their rafters. The sheep and the cows lay down behind the pigs and began to chew the cud. The two cart horses, Boxer and the Clover, came in together, walking very slowly and settling down their vast hairy hoofs with great care lest there should be some small animal concealed in the straw. Clover was a stout, motherly mare approaching middle life and who had never quite got her finger back after her fourth fall. Boxer was an enormous beast, nearly 18 hands high and as strong as any two ordinary horses put together. A white strip down his nose gave him a somewhat stupid appearance, and in fact he was not of the first-rate intelligence. But he was universally respected for his steadiness of characters and tremendous powers of work. Okay. Just wait, okay. A white strip, okay, this one, and in fact, he was not aware of rare in first intelligence, but he was universally respected for his steadiness of characters and tremendous power of work. After the horses came Muriel, the white goat, and Benjamin, the donkey. Benjamin was the oldest animal, okay, so Benjamin, okay, the donkey. Benjamin was the oldest animal on the farm and the worst tempered. He seldom talked, and when he did, it usually was to make some cynical remark. For instance, he would say that the god had given him a tail to keep the flies off, but that he would sooner have had no tail and no flies. Alone among the animals on the farm, he never laughed. If asked why, he would say that he saw nothing to laugh at. Nevertheless, without openly admitting it, he was devoted to Boxer. The two of them usually spent their Sundays together in the small paddock beyond the orchards, gazing side by side and never speaking. The two horses had just lain down when a brood of ducklings, to which they had lost their mothers, filed into the barn, cheeping feebly and wandering from side to side to find some places where they would not be trodden on. Clover made a sort of a wall round them with a great foreleg, and the duckling nestled down inside it, promptly fell asleep. At last, the moment Molly, the foolish when a pretty white mare who drew Mr. John Strap came mincing gently and chewing at a lump of sugar. She took a place near the front and began flirting her white mane, hoping to draw attention to the red ribbons it was plated with. Last of all came the cats, who looked around as usual for the warmest places, and finally squeezed herself in between Boxer and Clover. There she purred contentedly throughout major speeches without listening to a word of what he was saying. All the animals were now present except Moses, the tame raven, who slept on a perch behind the back door. Okay, just wait. Raven, okay. And okay. The tame raven who slept on a perch behind the back doors. When Major saw that they had all the made themselves comfortable and were waiting attentively, he cleared his throat and began. So this is a speech. Comrades, you have heard already about the strange dream that I had last night, but I will come to the dream later. I have something else to say first. I do not think, comrades, that I shall be with you for many months longer, and before I die, I feel it is my duty to pass on to you such wisdom as I have acquired. I have had a long life. I have had much time for thought as I lay alone in my stall, and I think I may say that I understand the nature of life on this earth as well as any animal now living. It is about this that I wish to speak to you. Now, comrades, what is the nature of this life of ours? Let us face it. Lives are miserable, laborious, and short. We are born. Okay, so he is the person who gives a speech which led to the rebellion. We are born, we are given just so much food as will keep the breath in our bodies, and those of us who are capable of it are first to work to the last atom of our strength. And the very instant that our usefulness has come to an end, we are slaughtered with a hideous cruelty. No animal in Kingland knows the meaning of happiness or leisure after he is a year old. No animal in England is free. The life of an animal is misery and slavery. That is the plain truth. But is this simply a part of the order of a nature? Is it because this land of ours is so poor that it cannot afford a decent life to those who dwell upon it? No, comrades, 1,000 times no. The soil of England is fertile. Its climate is good. It is capable of affording food in abundance to an enormously greater number of an animal that now inhabits. The single farm of ours would support a dozen horses, 20 cows, hundreds of sheep, and all of them living in a comfort and dignity that are now almost beyond our imagining. Then why do we continue in this miserable condition? Because nearly the whole of the produce of our labor is stolen from us by human beings. There, comrades, is the answer to all our problem. It is summed up in a single word: man. Man is the only real enemy we have. Remove man from the scene, and the root causes of the hunger and overwork is abolished forever. Man is the only creature that consumes without producing. He does not give milk. He does not lay eggs. He is too weak to pull the plug. He cannot run fast enough to catch rabbits, yet he is lord of all animals. He sets them to work. He gives back to them the bare minimum that will prevent them from starving, and the rest he keeps for himself. Our labor tills the soil, our dung fertilizes it, and yet there is not one of us that owns more than his bare skin. You cows that I see before me, how many thousands of gallons of milk have you given during the last year? And what has happened to that milk which should have been breeding up us, sturdy calves? Every drop of it has gone down the throats of our enemies and our hens. And you hens, how many eggs have you laid in the last year? And how many of those eggs ever hatched into the chickens? The rest have all gone to market to bring in the money for Jones and his men. And you, Clover, where are those 4 foals you bore, who should have been the support and the pleasure of your old age? Each was stolen at a year old. You will never see one of them again in return for your 4 confinements and all your labor in the fields. What have you ever had except your bare ration in a stall? And even the miserable lives we lead are not allowed to reach their natural span. For myself, I do not grumble, for I am one of the lucky ones. I am 12 years old and have had over 400 children. Such is the natural life of a pig, but no animal escapes the cruel knife in the end. You young porkers who are sitting in front of me, every one of you will scream your life out at the block within a year. To that horror we all must come. Cows, pigs, hens, sheep, everyone, even the horses and the dogs have no better fates. You, boxer, the very day that those great muscles of yours lose their powers, Jones will sell you to the knacker who will cut your throats and boil you down for the foxhounds. As for the dogs, when they grow old and toothless, Jones tries a brick around their neck and drown them in the nearest pond. Is it not crystal clear that then the comrades that all the evils of this life of ours spring from the tyranny of and human beings? Only get rid of a man and the produce of our labor would be ours own. Almost overnight we could become rich and free. What then must do we do? Why work night and day, body and a soul, for the overthrow of the human race? That is my message to you, comrades. Rebellion. I do not know when that rebellion will come. It might be in a week or it might be in 100 years, but I know as surely as I see the straw beneath my feet that sooner or later justice will be done. Fix your eyes on that. Comrades, throughout the short remainders of your lives, and above all, pass on this message of mine to those who come after you, so that future generations shall carry on the struggle until it is victorious. And remember, comrades, your resolution must never falter. No argument must lead you astray. Never listen when they tell you that man and the animals have a common interest, that the prosperity of the one is the prosperity of the others. It is all lies. Man serves the interest of no creature except himself. I repeat, man serves the interest of no one except himself. And among us animals, let there be perfect unity, perfect comradeship in the struggle, and all men are enemies. All animal are comrades. At this moment, there was a tremendous uproar while Major was okay. So he is a lot Major, no, old Major. Okay, while Major was speaking, four large rats had crept out of their holes and were sitting on the hind quarters, listening to him. The dogs had certainly caught sight of them, and it was only by a swift dash for their holes that the rats saved their lives. Major raised his trotter for silence. Comrades, he said, there is a point that must be settled. The wild creatures such as rats and rabbits are they our friends or our enemies? Let us put this to the vote. I propose this question to the meeting. Are rats comrades? The vote was taken at once and it was agreed by an overwhelming majority that rats were comrades. Okay. I mean, I just want to know what is the perfect pronunciation of comrade? Comrade.
Comrade.
Comrade, okay, comrade. It's my comrade, okay. So it's a comrade. Pronunciations.
Comrade.
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 Comrade, okay, comrade, okay, comrade, right? It's right, comrade. It's a comrade. Comrade.
Comrade.
Comrader. The votes was taken at once and it was agreed by overwhelming majority that the rats were comrades. There were only four dissentients, the three dogs and the cats, and who was afterwards discovered to have voted on both sides. Major continued. I have little more to say. I merely repeat. Remember, always your duty of enmity towards man and his all his waste. Whatever goes upon his two legs is an enemy. Whatever goes up upon four legs or has a wings is a friend. And remember also that in a fighting against man, we must not come to resemble him. Okay, this is a very important line. There is a quote by Friedrich Nietzsche that he says that if you look into the abyss for a long time, the abyss will look back into you, which means that when you are trying to fight the evil for a very long time, then later what will happen is that you become the evil because of so much of the concentration of your energy in that you might not become. So you have to be careful of that, right? So he says that it's very important. We must not come to resemble him, right? And remember also that in fighting against a man, we must not come to resemble him. Even when you have conquered him, do not adopt his vices. No animal must ever live in a house or sleep in a bed. So this is the principle. So you cannot live in a house, you cannot sleep, okay? No animal must ever live in a house, or sleep in a bed, or wear a clothes, or drink alcohol, or smoke tobacco, or touch money, or engage in a trade. All the habits of a man are evil. And above all, no animal must ever tyrannize over his own kind, weak or strong, clever or simple. We are all brothers. No animal must ever kill any other animals. All animals are equal. And now, comrades, I will tell you about my dream of last nights. I cannot describe the dream to you. It was a dream of the earth as it will be when man has vanished, but it reminded me of something that I had long forgotten. Many years ago, when I was a little pig, my mother and the other souls used to sing a song, old song of which they knew only the tune and the first three words. I had known that tune in my infancy, but it had long since passed out of my mind. Last night, however, it came back to me in my dreams, and what is more, the words of the song also came back words. I am certain which we were sung by the animals of the long ago and have been lost to memory for generations. I will sing you that song now, comrades. I'm old and my voice is hoarse, but when I have taught you the tune, you can sing it better for yourself. It is called Beast of England. Okay, so the Beast of England is the poem. Old Major cleared his throat and began to sing, as he has said. His voice was hoarse, but he sang well enough, and it was a steering tune, something between Clementine and La Cusa Kuruchu. The words ran, and this is the poem I'm reading. Beast of England, beast of Ireland, beast of every land and clime, hearken to my joyful tidings of the golden future time. Soon or late the day is coming, tyrant man shall be overthrown, and the fruitful fields of England shall be trod by the beast alone. Rings shall vanish from our noses. Okay, so he's talking about the rings, the animal that the men the puts. The rings shall vanish from our noses, and the harness from our back. Bit and spur shall rust forever. Cruel whips no more shall crack. Riches more than mine can picture. Wheat and barley, oats and hay. Clover, beans, and mangel wurzels shall be ours upon that day. Bright will shine the field of England. Purer shall its waters be. Sweeter yet shall blow its breezes on the day that sets us free. For that day we all must labor, though we die before it breaks. Cows and horses, geese and turkeys, all must toil for the freedom's sake. Beast of England, beast of Ireland, beast of every land and clime, hearken well and spread my tidings of the golden future time. So this is known as the Beast of England. The poem name is Beast of England. The singing of the song threw the animals into the wildest excitement to almost ever, before Major had reached the ends, they had begun singing it for themselves. Even the stupidest of them had already picked up the tune and had a few words. And as for the clever ones, such as the pigs and the dogs, they had the entire song by heart within a few minutes. And then, after a few preliminary tries, the whole farm burst out into the Beast of England in a tremendous unison. The cows lowed it, the dogs whined it, the sheep bleated it, the horses whined it, the ducks quacked it, and they were also delighted with the strong song that they sang it right through 5 minutes in a succession, and they might have continued singing it all night if they had not been interrupted. Unfortunately, the uproar awoke Mr. Jones, who sprang out of bed, making sure that there was no fox in the yard. He seized the gun, which always stood in a corner of his bedroom, and let fly a charge of a number 6 shot in the darkness. The pellets buried themselves in the wall of the barn, and the meeting broke up hurriedly. Everyone fled to his own sleeping place. The birds jumped onto the perches. The animals settled down in the straw, and the whole farm was asleep in a moment. Chapter number 2. 3 nights later, old Major died peacefully in his sleep. His body was buried at the foot of the orchard. This was early in March. During the next 3 months, there was much secret activity. Major's speech had given to the more intelligent animals on the farm a completely new outlook on life. They did not know when the rebellion predicted by Major would take place. They had no reason for thinking that it would be within their own lifetimes, but they saw clearly that it was their duty to prepare for it. The work of teaching and organizing the others well naturally fell upon the pigs, who were generally recognized as being the cleverest of animals. Okay, so as mentioned, that pigs are considered as the cleverest of animals. Okay, I highly doubt that. Preeminent among the pigs were 2 young boars named Snowballs and Napoleon. Okay, preeminent among the pigs. Okay, preeminent among the pigs were 2 young boars named being the cleverest of animals. Okay, preeminent among the pigs were 2 young boars named Snowball and Napoleon, Mr. Whom, this one's okay. Whom Mr. Jones was breeding up for sale. Oh, was breeding up for sale. Napoleon was large, rather, fierce looking Berkshire boar, the only Berkshire on the farm, not much of a talker, but with a reputation for getting his own way. Snowball was a more vivacious pig than Napoleon, quicker in speech and more inventive, but was not considered to have the same depth of characters. To all the other male pigs on the farm were porkers. The best known among them was a small fat pig named Squealer, with a very round cheeks, twinkling eyes, nimble movement, and a shrill voice. He was a brilliant talker, and when he was arguing some difficult point, he had a way of skipping them side to side and whisking his tail, which was somehow very persuasive. The other set of Squealer that he could turn black into white. These three had elaborated old Major's teaching into a complete systems of thought, to which they gave the name of animalism. The three had elaborated all this teaching into a complete system of thoughts. Okay, so they basically made like a system or a book, right? Where it's like a philosophy, their philosophy. These three had elaborated old Major's teaching into a complete system of thoughts, to which they gave the name of animalism, right? And there is a very quote, right? There's a saying by Anand Ranganathan. He says that I do not agree with any ism except criticism. Several nights a week after Mr. Jones was asleep, they had held a secret meeting in the barn and expounded the principles of animalism to the others. At the beginning, they met with such a stupidity and apathy. Some of animals talked of the duty of loyalty to Mr. Jones, whom they referred to as master, or made elementary remarks such as, Mr. Jones feeds us. If he were gone, we should starve to death. Others asked such a question as, why should we care what happens after we are dead? Or if this rebellion is to happen anyway, what differences does it make whether we work for it or not? And the pigs had great difficulty in making them see that this was a contrary to the spirit of animalism. The stupidest question of all were asked by Molly, the white mare. The very first question she asked Snowball was, will there still be sugar after the rebellion? What sugar? No, said Snowball firmly. We have no means of making sugar on his farm, on these farms. Besides, you do not need sugar. You will have all the oats, and they want you. And hay you want, and I shall still be allowed to wear ribbons in my mane? Asked Molly. Comrade, said Snowball, those ribbons that you are so devoted to are the badge of slavery. Can you not understand the liberty is worth more than ribbons? Molly agreed, but she did not sound very convinced. The pigs had an even harder struggle to counteract the lies put about by Moses, the tame raven. Moses was, who was Mr. Jones' special pet, was a spy. Oh, okay. So he was a spy because he was the favorite pet of Mr. Jones. The pigs had an even harder struggle to counteract the lies put about by Moses, the tame raven. Moses, who was Mr. Jones' special pet, was a spy and a tale bearer, but he was also a clever talker. He claimed to know of the existence of a mysterious country called Sugar Candy Mountain, to which all animals went when they died. It was situated somewhere up in the sky, a little distance beyond the clouds. Moses said, so is he talking about people who are religious and the religious leader? In Sugar Candy Mountain, it was Sunday, 7 days a week. Clover was in season all the year round, and lump sugars and in a linseed cake grew on the hedges. The animals hated Moses because he told tales and did not work, but some of them believed in Sugar Candy Mountain, and the pigs had to argue very hard to persuade them that there was no such place. Their most faithful disciples were the two cart horses, Boxer and Clover. These two had a great difficulty in making anything out for themselves, but having once accepted the pigs as their teachers, they absorbed everything what they were told and pass it on to the other male animals by simple argument. They were unfailing in their attendance and as at the secret meetings in the barn, and led the singing beast of the Englands, with which the meeting always ended. Now, beast of the Englands. Okay, now as it turned out, the rebellion was achieved much earlier and more easily than anyone expected. In the past years, Mr. Jones, although a heart master, had been a capable farmer, but of the late he had fallen on the evil days. He had become much disheartened after losing money in a lawsuit, and had taken to drinking more than was good for him. For whole days at a time, he would lounge in his Windsor chair in the kitchen, reading the newspaper, drinking, and occasionally feeding Moses on the crust of bread, soaker, and beer. His men were idle and dishonest. The fields were full of weeds, the building wanted roofing, and the hedges
were neglected and the animals were underfed. June came and the hay was almost ready for cutting. On Midsummer's Eve, which was Saturday, Mr. Jones went into Wellington's and got so drunk at the Red Lion that he did not come back till midday on Sunday. The man had milked the cows in the early morning and then he had gone out rabbiting without bothering to feed the animals. When Mr. Jones got back, he immediately went to sleep on the drawing room sofa with the news of the world over his face, so that when evening came, the animals were still unfed. At last they could stand it no longer. One of the cows broke in the door of the store shed with her horn, and all the animals began to help themselves from the pins. It was just then Mr. Jones woke up. The next moment, he and his foreman were in the store shed with the whips in their hand, lashing out in all directions. This was more than the hungry animals could bear. With one record, though nothing of the kind had been planned beforehand. They flung themselves upon the tormentors. Jones and his men certainly found themselves being butted and kicked from all sides. The situation was quite out of their control. They had never seen animals behave like this before, and the certain uprising of creatures who they were used to thrashing and maltreating just as they chose, frightened them almost out of their wits. After only a moment or two, they gave up trying to defend themselves and took to their heels. A minute later, all five of them were in a full flight down the cart track that led to the main road stand, with the animals pursuing them in a train. Mrs. Jones looked out of the bedroom windows, saw what was happening, hurriedly flung a few possessions into a carpet bag and slipped out of the farm by another way. Moses sprang off his perch and flapped after her, croaking loudly. Meanwhile, the animals had chased Jones and his men out on the road and slammed the five-barred gate behind them. And so, almost before they knew what was happening, the rebellion had been successful, carried through. Jones was expelled, and the manor farm was theirs. So this was the name of the farm, the manor. Okay, manor farm. So for the first few minutes, the animal could hardly believe in their good fortune. Their first act was to gallop in the body right around the boundaries of the farm, as though to make it quite sure that no human being was hiding anywhere upon it. Then they raced back to the farm building to wipe out the last traces of John's hatred train. The harness rooms at the end of the stables were broken open. The bits, the nose rings, the dog chains, the cruel knives with which Mr. Jones had been used to castrate the pigs and the lambs were all flung down the well, and the rain. Okay, the rain. The 3 nights later. Okay, the rain. Drains, the halters, the blinkers, the degrading nosebacks were thrown out on the rubbish fire which was burning in the yard. So were the whips. All the animals, capered with joy when they saw the whips going up in the flames. Snowball also threw onto the fire, the ribbons with which the horses' manes and tails had usually been decorated on market days. Ribbons, he said, should be considered as clothes, which are the mark of a human being. So all animals should go naked. So when Boxer heard this, he fetched the small straw hat which he wore in the summers to keep the flies out of his ears and flung it onto the fire with the rest. In a very little while, the animals had destroyed everything that reminded them of Mr. Jones. Napoleon then led them back to the store sheds and served out a double rations of corn to everybody, and with 2 biscuits for each dog. Then they sang Beast of England from end to end 7 times running, and after that they settled down for the night and slept as they had never slept before. But they woke up at dawn as usual, and certainly remembering the glorious things that happened, that they all raced out in the pasture together. A little way down the pasture there were a knoll that commanded a view of most of the farm. The animals rushed to the top of it and gazed around them in the clear morning light. Yes, it was theirs. Everything that could they see was theirs. In the ecstasy of the thought, they gambled round and round. They hurled themselves into the air in a great leaps of excitement. They rolled in the dew. They cropped in mouthfuls of the sweet summer grass. They kicked out clods of the black earth and snuffed its rich scents. Then they made a tour of inspection of the whole farm and surveyed with a speechless admiration of the plowlands and the hayfield, the ore carts and the pool, the spinney. It was as though they had never seen these things before, and even now they could hardly believe it was theirs all their own. Then they filed back to the farm building and halted in silence outside the door of a farmhouse that was theirs too. But they were frightened to go inside. After a moment, however, Snowball and Napoleon butted the door open with their shoulders, and the animals entered in a single file, walking with the utmost care for fear of disturbing anything. They tiptoed from room to room, afraid to speak about whispers, and gazing with a kind of awe at the unbelievable luxury at the beds with the feather mattresses, the looking glasses, the horsehair sofa, the Brussels carpet, the lithograph of Queen Victoria over the drawing room mantelpiece. They were just coming down the stairs when Molly was discovered to be missing. Going back, the others found that she had remained behind in the best, bedroom, She had taken a piece of the blue ribbon from Mrs. Jones' dressing table and was holding it against her shoulders and biting herself in the glass in a very foolish manner. The others reproached her sharply and they went outside. Some hams hanging in the kitchen were taken out for burial, and then battle of the beers and the scullery stove in with a kick from the boxes of otherwise nothing in this house was touched. A unanimous resolution was passed on the spot that the farmhouse should be preserved as a museum. Okay, all were agreed that no animal must ever live there. The animals had their breakfast, and then Snowball and Napoleon called them together again. Comrades, said the Snowball, it is 6:30, and we have a long day before us. Today we begin the day hay harvest, but there is another matter that must be attended for the first. There is another matter that must be attended first. The pigs now revealed that during the past 3 months they had taught themselves to read and write from an old spelling books which had belonged to Mr. Jones' children and which had been thrown on the rubbish heap. Napoleon sent for pots of black and white paints and led the way down to the 5 barred gates that I gave onto the main roads. Then Snowball, for it was Snowball who was the best at writing, took a brush between the two knuckles of his trotters to paint out Manor Farm from the top bar of the gate, and in its place painted Animal Farm. So they've changed the name. This was to be the name of the farm from now onwards. So instead of Manor Farm, will be Animals Farm. This one, so he wrote it out Manor Farms from the top bar of the gate, and its place painted Animal Farm. This was to be the name of the farm from now onwards. After this, they went back to the farm building where Snowball and Napoleon sent for a ladder, which they caused to be set against the end wall of the big barn. They explained that by their studies of the past 3 months, the pigs had succeeded in reducing the principle of animalism to 7 commandments. That means it has to be followed. It's like a principle. The 7 commandments would now be inscribed on the walls. They would form an unalterable law by which all the animals on animals farm must live forever after. With some difficulty, for it is not easy for a pig to balance himself on a ladder, Snowball climbed up and set to work with the Squealer a few rungs below him, holding the paint pot. The commandments were written on the turret wall in the great white letters that could be read 30 yards away. That they ran thus. So what are these 7 commandments? First is whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. Oh, the 7 commandments. Whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. Whatever goes upon 4 legs or has wings is a friend. Okay, whatever goes upon 2 legs is an enemy. Whatever goes upon 4 legs or has a wing is a friend. No animal shall wear clothes. Okay, this is very important. Okay, so this no animals. First is equals to 2 legs. Enemy, 4 legs, or must be 2 legs is fine, but with the wings, okay, it's going to be friend. No animals shall wear clothes. No animal shall sleep in a bed. No animal shall drink alcohol. No animal shall kill any other animals. Okay, no animal shall kill any other animals, and all animals are equal. So the 7th is very important. All animals are equal. All animals are equal. Okay, it was a very neatly written, and except that friend was written in a friend. Okay, the spelling wrong, and one of the s was the wrong way around. The spelling was correct all the way though through. Snowball read it loud for the benefits of the others. All the animals noted in complete agreements, and the cleverer ones are the ones begin to learn the commandments by heart. Now, comrades, cried Snowball, throwing down the paintbrush to the hayfield, let us make it a point of honor to get in the harvest more quickly than Jones and his men could do. But at this moment, the 3 cows, who had seemed uneasy for some time past, set up a loud lowing. They had not been milked for 24 hours, and their udders were almost bursting. After a little thought, the pigs sent for buckets and milked the cows fairly successfully, their trotters being well adapted to this task. Soon there were 5 buckets of frothing, creamy milk, at which many of the animals looked with a considerable interest. What is going to happen to all the milk? Said someone. Jones used sometimes to mix some of it in a mash, said one of the hens. Never mind the milk, comrades, cried Napoleon, placing himself in the front of the buckets. This will be attended to. The harvest is more important. Comrade Snowball will lead the way. I shall follow in a few minutes. Forward, comrades. The hay is waiting. So the animals trooped down to the hayfield to begin the harvest, and when they came back in the evening, it was noticed that the milk had disappeared. Okay, now question is, what happened to the milk? Chapter number 3. How they toiled and sweetened to get the hay inched, but the efforts were rewarded, for the harvest was even a bigger success than they had hoped. Sometimes the work was hard. The implements had been designed for human beings and not for animals, and it was a great drawback that no animal was able to use any tools that involved standing on his hind legs. But the pig were so clever that they could think of a way around every difficulty. As for the horses, they knew every inch of the field and in fact understood the business of mowing and raking far better than Jones and his men had ever done. The pigs did not actually work but directed and supervised the others. With their superior knowledge, it was natural that they should assume the leadership. Boxer and Clovers could harness themselves to the cutters of the horse rank. No bits or reins were needed in this race, of course, and tramped steadily round and round the wheel, with the pig walking behind and calling out, "Gee up, comrade," or "War back, comrades," as the case might be, and every animals down to the humblest worked at turning their hay and gathering it. Even the ducks and hens toiled to and fro all the day in the suns, carrying tiny whips of hay in their beaks. In the end, they finished the harvest in 2 days, less time than it had usually taken Jones and his men. Moreover, it was the biggest harvest that the farm had ever seen. There was no wastage whatever. The hens and the ducks, with their sharp eyes, had gathered up the very last stock, and not an animal on the farm had stolen so much as a mouthful. All through that summer, the work of the farm went like a clockwork. The animals were happy as they had never conceived it possible to be. Every mouthful of food was an acute positive pleasure now that it was truly their own food, produced by themselves and for themselves, not doled out to themselves by grudging masters. With their worthless, parasitical human beings gone, there was more for everyone to eat. There was more leisure to inexperienced though the animals were. They met with the many difficulties. For instance, later in that year, when they harvested the corn, they had to tread it out in the ancient style and blow away the chaff with the breath, since the farm possessed no threshing machines. Okay, but the pigs were, with their cleverness, and Boxers with their tremendous muscles, always pulled them through. Boxer was the admirations of everybody. He had been a hard worker even in John's time, but now he seemed more like three horses than once. There were days when the entire work of the farm seems to be rest on his mighty shoulders. From morning to night, he was pushing and pulling, always at the spot where the work was hardest. He had made an arrangement with one of the cockerels to call him in the morning half an hour earlier than anyone else, and would put in some volunteers to labor at whatever seems to be the most needed before the regular day's work began. His answers to every problem, every setback was, "I will work harder," which he had adopted as his personal motto. But everyone worked according to his capacity. The hens, the ducks, for instance, saved 5 bushels of corn at the harvest by gathering up the stray grains. Nobody stole, nobody crumbled over his rations. The quarreling and the biting and the jealousy, which had been normal features of their lives in the old days, had almost disappeared. Nobody shirked, or almost nobody. Molly, it was true, was not at getting up in the mornings and had a way of leaving work early on the grounds. There was a stone in her hoof, and the behavior of the cat was somewhat peculiar. It was soon noticed that when there was a work to be done, that the cat would never be found. She would vanish for hours and on end, when then reappear at the meal times or in the evening after work was over, although as though nothing had happened. But she always made such excellent excuses and peered so affectionately that it was impossible not to believe in her good intentions. Old Benjamin, the donkey, seemed quite unchanged since the rebellion. He did his work in the same slow, obstinate way as he had done in John's time, never shirking and never volunteering for extra work either about the rebellion and its result. He would express no opinion when asked whether he was not happier now that the Jones was gone. He would only say, "Donkeys live a long time. None of you has ever seen a dead donkey," and the others had to be content with his cryptic answers. On Sundays, there was no work. Breakfast was an hour later than usual, and after breakfast, there was a ceremony which was observed every week without a fail. First came the hoisting of the flag. Snowball had found in the harness room an old green tablecloth of a Mrs. Jones, and had painted on it a hoof and a horn in white. This was a run up the flag, stuff in the farmhouse garden every Sunday morning. The flag was green. Snowball explained to represent the green fields of the England, while the hoof and the horn signified the future republic of the animals which would arise when the human races had been finally overthrown. After the hoisting of the flag, all the animals trooped into the big barn for a general assembly, which was known as the meeting. Here, the work of the coming week was planned out, and resolutions were put forward and debated. It was always the pigs who put forward the resolution. The other animals understood how to vote, but could never think of any resolution of their own. Snowball and Napoleon were by far the most active in the debates, but it was noticed that these two were never in agreement. Whatever suggestions either of them made, the other could be counted on to opposites, even when it was resolved, a thing no one could object to it in itself. To set aside the small paddock behind the orchard as a home of rest for animals who were past work, there were stormy debates over the correcting retiring age for each class of animals. The meeting always ended with the singing of Beast of England, and the afternoon was given up to recreations. The pig had set aside the harness room as a headquarter for themselves. Here in the evening, they studied blacksmithing, carpentering, and other necessary artwork from books which they had brought out of the farmers. Snowball also busied himself with the organizing the other animals into what he called animal committees. He was indefatigable at this. He formed the egg production committee for the hens, the clean tails league for the cows, and the wild comrades at re-education committee. The object of this was to tame the rats and the rabbits, the white wool movement for the sheep, and the various others. Besides instituting classes and reading and writing on the whole, these projects were a failure. The attempts to tame the wild creatures, for instance, broke down almost immediately. They continued to behave very much as before, and when treated with their generosity, simply took advantage of it. The cat joined the re-education, committee and very active in it for some days. She was seen one day sitting on a roof and talking to some sparrow who were just out of her reach. She was telling them that all animals were now comrades and that any sparrow who chooses would come and perch on her bough, but the sparrow kept their distance. The reading and writing classes, however, were a great success. By the autumn, almost every animal on the farm was literate in some degree. As for the pigs, they could already read, write, and perfectly. The dogs learned to read fairly well, but were not interested in reading anything except the Seven Commandments. As for the pigs, they could already read and write perfectly. The dogs learned to read fairly well, but not interested in reading anything except the Seven Commandments. Muriel, the goat, could read somewhat better than dogs, and sometimes used to read to the others in the evening from scrap of newspaper which she found in the rubbish heap. Benjamin could read as well as any pig, but never exercised his faculty. So, so far as he knew, he said there was nothing worth reading. So he's mostly like Friedrich Nietzsche, like philosophy. There's no purpose. Why are we doing it? Uh, he said there was nothing worth reading. Clover learned the whole alphabet but could not put the words together. Boxer could not get beyond the letter D. He would trace out A, B, C, D in the dust with a great hoof and then would stand staring at the letters with his ear back, sometimes shaking his forelock, trying with all his might to remember what came next and never succeeding. On several occasions, he did learn E, F, G, H, but by the time he knew them, State was already discovered that he had forgotten A, B, C, D. Finally, he decided to be content with the first four letters and used to write them out once or twice every day to refresh his memory. Molly refused to learn any but the six letters which spell her own name. She would form this very neatly out of piece of twig and would then decorate them with a flower or two and walk around them, admiring them. None of the other animals on the farm could get further than the letter A. It was also found that the superior animals such as the sheep, hens, and ducks were unable to learn the Seven Commandments by heart. After much thought, Snowball declared that the Seven Commandments could in effect be reduced to a single maxim, namely, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad. This, he said, contained the essential principles of animalism. Whoever had thoroughly grasped it would be safe from the human influences. The birds at first objected, since it seems to them that they had also 2 legs, but Snowball proved to them that this was not so. A bird's wing, comrade, he said, is an organ of a propulsion and not of a manipulation. It should therefore be regarded as a leg. The distinguishing mark of a man is the hand, the instrument with which he does all his mischief. It's actually interesting, right? That the characters of the birds could, it actually matches with the human character, right? Not all the humans are same. So yeah, the birds did not understand Snowball's long words, but they accepted his explanations, and all the humbler animals set to work to learn the new maxim by heart. 4 legs good, 2 legs bad was inscribed, and even on the end wall of the barn, above the Seven Commandments, and in a bigger letters. When they had once got it by heart, the sheep developed a great liking for this maxim, and often as they lay in the field, they would all start bleating, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, 4 legs good, 2 legs bad, and keep it up for hours on end and never growing tired of it. Napoleon took no interest in Snowball's committee. He said that the education of the young was more important than anything that could be done for those who were already grown ups. It happened that Jessie and Bluebell had both whelped soon after the harvest, giving birth between them to 9 sturdy puppies. As soon as they were weaned, Napoleon took them away from their mothers, saying that he would make himself responsible for their educations. He took them up into a loft which could only be reached by the ladder from the harnesses rooms, and they kept them in such a seclusion that the rest of the farm soon forgot their existence. Okay. The mystery of where the milk went to was soon cleared up. It was mixed every day into the pig's mash. The early apples were now ripening. Is it ripening or ripening? Okay, just wait. Okay, RIPEN pronunciation. It's ripening, right? Ripening.
Ripening.
In American, it's ripening. In a British, it's ripening.
Ripening.
It's ripening. It's rather ripening.
Ripening.
Ripening. Okay, it's not ripening at all. Okay, so the early apples were now ripening, and the grass of the orchards were little littered with windfalls. The animals had assumed, as a matter of the course, that these would be shared out equally. One day, however, the order went forth that all the windfalls were to be collected and brought to the harness rooms for the use of the pigs. At this, some of the other animals murmured, but it was of no use. All the pigs were in full agreement on this point. Even Snowball and Napoleon, Squealer, was sent to make the necessary explanation to this. Okay, so he was the PR, right, public relation guy. Comrades, he cried, you do not imagine, I hope, that we pigs are doing this in a spirit of selfishness and privilege. Many of us actually dislike the milk and apples. I dislike them myself. Our sole object in taking this thing is to preserve our health. Milk and apples, this has been proven by the science, and comrades, contain substances absolutely necessary to the well-being of the pigs. We pigs are brain workers. The whole management and organization of this farm depends on us. Day and night we are watching over your welfare. This is you for your sake that we drink that milk and eat those apples. Do you know what would happen if we pigs fail in our duty? Jones would come back. Yes, Jones would come back. Surely. Comrades, cried Squealer almost pleadingly, skipping from side to side and whisking his tail. Surely there is no one among you who wants to see Jones come back. Now, if there was one thing that animals were completely certain of, it was that they did not want Jones back. So, when it was time to put them in this light, they had no more to say. The importance of keeping the pigs in a good health was all too obvious. So, it was agreed without further argument that the milk and the windfall apples, and also the main crops of an animal when they riped, uh, so they should be reserved for the pigs alone. By the late chapter number 4, by the late summer, the news of what happened on Animal Farm had spread across half the country. Every day, Snowball and Napoleon sent out flights of pigeons whose instructions were to mingle with the animals on neighboring farms, tell them the story of the rebellion, and teach them the tune of the Beast of England. Most of this time, Mr. Jones had spent sitting on the tape rooms of the Red Lion at Wellington's, complaining to anyone who would listen of the monstrous injustice he had suffering in being turned out of his property by a pack of good-for-nothing animals. The other farmers sympathized in principle, but they did not did not at first give him much help. At heart, each of them was secretly wondering whether he could not somehow turn Jones' misfortune to his own advantage. It was lucky that the owners of the two farms which adjoined Animal Farm were on permanently bad terms. So one of them, which was named Foxwood, was a large, neglected, old-fashioned farm, much overgrown by the woodlands, with all its pastures worn out and its hedges in a disgraceful condition. Its owner, Mr. Pilkington, was an easygoing gentleman farmer who would spend most of his time in fishing or hunting according to the season. The other farmer, which was called Pinchfield, was a smaller and better kept. Its owners was a Mr. Fedrich, a tough, shrewd man, perpetually involved in lawsuits and with a name for driving hard bargains. These two disliked each other so much that it was difficult for them to come to any agreements, even in defense of their own interests. Nevertheless, they were both thoroughly frightened by the rebellion on the animal farm and very anxious to prevent their own animal from learning too much about it. At first, they pretended to laugh, to scorn the ideas of animals managing a farm for themselves. The whole thing would be over in a fortnight, they said. So they put it about the animals on the manor farm. They insisted on calling it the manor farm. They would not tolerate the name animal farm, were perpetually fighting among themselves, and were also rapidly starving to death. So when time passed and the animals had evidently not starved to death, Frederick and Pilkington changed the tunes and began to talk of the terrible wickedness that now flourished on Animal Farm. It was given out that the animal they practices cannibalism, tortured one another with the red hot horses shoes, and had their family females in common. This was what came of rebelling against the laws of nature. Frederick and Pilkington sexed. However, the stories were never fully believed. Rumors of wonderful farms where the human beings had been turned out and the animals managed their own affairs continued to circulate in vague and distorted forms, and throughout that year a wave of rebellious ran through the countryside. His bulls had been tractable, suddenly turned savage. Sheep broke down hedges and devoured the clovers. Cows kicked the pail over. Hunter refused their fences and shot their riders on the other side. Above all, the tune and even the words of the Beast of England were known everywhere. It had spread with astonishing speed. The humans being could not contain their rage when they heard the songs, though they pretended to think it merely it merely ridiculous. They could not understand. They said how even animals could bring themselves to sing such a contemptible rubbish. Any animal caught singing it was given a flogging on the spot, and yet the song was irresistible. The blackbirds whistled it in the hedges, the pigeons cooed it in the elms. It got into the din of the smithest and the tune of the church bells, and when the human being listened to it, they secretly trembled, hearing it in a prophecy of their own future doom. Early in October, when the corn was cut and stacked, and some of it was already threshed, a flight of pigeons came whirling through the air and alighted in the yard of an animal farm in the wildest excitement. Jones and all his men, with half a dozen men, others from the Foxwood and Pinchfield, had entered the 5 barred gates and were coming up the guard track that led to the farm. They were all carrying sticks, except Jones, who was marching ahead with a gun in his hands. Obviously, they were going to attempt the recapture of the farm. This had long been expected, and all the preparations had been made. Snowball, who had studied an old book of Julius Caesar's, okay. Okay. Snowball, who had studied on the old books of the Julius Caesar's campaign, which he had fought in the farmhouse, was in charge of the defensive operations. He gave his orders quickly, and in a couple of minutes early, every animal was at his post. As the human beings approached the farm building, Snowball launched its first attack. All the pigeons, to the number of 35, pigeons again 35, flew to and fro over the men's heads and muted upon them from mid-ears. And while the men were dealing with this, the geese, who had been hiding behind the hedge, rushed out and pegged viciously at the calves of their legs. However, this was only a light skirmishes maneuvers intended to create little disorders, and the men as easily drove the geese out with their sticks. Snowballs now launched his second line of attack. Muriel, Benjamin's, and all the ships now, with Snowball at the head of them, rushed forward and butted the men from every side. And while the Benjamin turned around and lashed at them with all his small hoofs, but once again the men with the sticks and their hobnail boards were too strong for them, and suddenly at a squeal from a Snowball, which was the signal for retreat, all the animals turned and fled through the gateways into the yard. The men gave a shout of triumph. They saw as they imagined their enemies in flight, and they rushed after them in disorder. This was what Snowball had intended. As soon as they were all well inside the yard, the 3 horses, the 3 cows, and the rest of the pigs who had been lying in ambush in the cowshed suddenly emerged in the rear, cutting off them. Snowball now gave the signal for the charge. He himself dashed straight at the Jones. Jones saw him coming, raised his gun and fired. The pellets scored bloody streaks along the Snowball's back, and a sheep dropped dead. Without halting for an instant, Snowball flung his 15-stone against Jones' legs. Jones was hurled in a pile of dung, and his gun flew out of his hands. But the most terrifying spectacle of all was Boxer, wading up on his hind legs and striking out with his great iron short hoofs like a stallion. His very first blow took a stable lad from a foxhole in the skull and stretched him lifeless in the mud. At the side, several men dropped their sticks and tried to run. Panic overtook them, and the next moment, all the animals together were chasing them round and round the yards. They were gored, kicked, bitten, trampled on. There was not an animal on the farm that did not take vengeance on them after his own fashions. Even the cat suddenly leaped off of a roof onto a cowman's shoulders and sank her claws in his neck, and at which he yelled horribly. At a moment when the opening was clear, all the men were glad enough to rush out of the yacht and make a bolt for the main road stand. So within 5 minutes of their invasion, but they were in ignominious retreat by the same way as they had come, with a flock of geese hissing after them and pecking at their calves all the way. So all the men were gone except one. Back in the yard, Boxer was pawing with his hoof at the stable lad who lay face down in the mud, trying to turn him over. The boy did not steer. He's dead, said Boxer sorrowfully. I had no intention of doing that. I forgot that I was wearing an iron shoe. Who will believe that I did not do this on purpose? No sentimentality, comrades, cried Snowball, from whose wounds the blood was still dripping. War is war. The only good human being is the dead one. I have no wish to take life, not even human life, repeated Boxers, and his eyes were full of tears. Where is Molly? Exclaimed somebody. Molly, in fact, was missing. For a moment there was a great alarm. It was a fear that the men might have harmed her in some way, or even carried her off with him. In the end, however, she was found hiding in her stall with her head buried among the hay in the manger. She had taken to flight as soon as the gun went off, and when the others came back from looking to her, it was to find that the stable lad, who in fact was only stunned, had already recovered and made up. The animal had now reassembled in the wildest excitements, each recounting his own exploits in the battle of the top of his voice. An impromptu celebrations of the victory was held immediately. The flag was turned up, and the Beast of England was sung numbers of times. When Then the sheep who had been killed was given a solemn funeral, a hawthorn bush being planted on her grave. At the gravesite, Snowball made a little speech emphasizing the need for all the animals to be ready to die for Animal Farm if needed be. The animals decided unanimously to create a military decorations. Animal Hero First Class, which was conferred there and then on a Snowball and box. It consisted of a brass metals. They were really some old horse brasses which had been found in the harness rooms to be worn on Sundays and holidays. There were also Animal Heroes Second Class, which was conferred posthumously on the dead sheep. There was much discussion as to what the battle should be called. In the end, it was named the Battle of a Cowshed, since that was where the ambush had been sprung. Mr. Jones' gun had been found lying in the mud, and it was known that there was a supply of a cartridge in the farmhouse. It was decided to set the gun up at the foot of the flagstaff like a piece of artillery and to fire it twice a year. Once on October the 12th, the anniversary of the Battle of the Cowsheds, and once a midsummer day, the anniversary of the rebellion. So, I mean, it seems that they have made like a lots of. This is exactly how the human did, right? When human civilization started. We were not very smart, and gradually that's what we do this, and this is how the tradition, the rituals became the culture, the clothes, what we wear, what we do, what we sing, what we dance, all things came, right? This is how it is. This is the starting point. Now, chapter number 5. As winter drew on, Molly became more and more troublesome. She was late for her work every morning and excused herself by saying that she had overslept, and she complained of mysterious pains. Although her appetite was excellent, on every kind of a pretext, she would run away from work and go to the drinking pool, where she would stand foolishly, gazing at her own reflection in the water. But there was also rumors of something more serious. One day, as Molly trolled blithely into the yard, flirting out a long tail and chewing at a stalk of hay, Clover took her aside. Molly, she said, I have something very serious to say to you. This morning I saw you looking over the hedge that divides Animal Farm from the Foxwoods. One of the Mr. Pilkington's men was standing on the other sides of the hedge, and I was a long way away, but I'm almost certain I saw this. He was talking to you, and you were allowing him to stroke your nose. What does that mean, Molly? He didn't. I wasn't. It isn't true, cried Molly, beginning to prance about and paw the ground. Molly, look at me in the face. Do you give me your word of honor that the man was not stroking your nose? It isn't true, repeated Molly, but she could not look Clover in the face, and the next moment she took her heels and galloped away into the field. A thought struck Clover. Without saying anything to the others, she went to Molly's stall and turned over the straw with her dove. Hidden under the straw was a little pile of lump sugar and several bunches of ribbon of different colors. 3 days later, Molly disappeared. For some weeks, nothing was known of her whereabouts. Then the pigeon reported that they had seen her on the other side of the Wellington. She was between the shafts of the smart dog carts, painted red and black, which was standing outside a public house. A fat, red-faced man in a check breeches and gaiters, who looked like a publicanist, was stroking her nose and feeding her with the sugar. Her coat was newly clipped, and she wore a scarlet ribbon around her forelock. She appeared to be enjoying herself, so the pigeon said. None of the animals were ever mentioned Molly against. In the January, there came a bitterly hard weather. The earth was like iron, and nothing could be done in the fields. Many meetings were held in the big barns, and the pigs occupied themselves with the planning out the work of the coming seasons. It had come to the exhibit that the pigs, who were manifestly cleverer than the other animals, should decide all the questions of the farm policy, though their decision had to be ratified by a majority votes. This arrangement would have worked well enough if it had not been for the disputes between Snowball and Napoleon. Okay, so to to fire. Yeah, these two disagreed at every point where disagreement was possible. If one of them suggested showing a bigger acreage with the barley, the other was certain to demand a bigger acreage of oats. And if one of them said that the such and such field was just right for the cabbage, the other would declare that it was useless for anything except oats. Each had its own following, and there were some violent debates at the meeting. Snowball often won over the majority of by his brilliant speeches, but Napoleon was better at canvassing support for himself in between times. He was especially successful with the sheep. Of late, the sheep had to had taken to bleedings, 4 legs goods, 2 legs bad, both in hand and both in and out of the seasons, and they often interrupted the meeting with this. It was noticed that they were especially liable to break into 4 legs goods, 2 legs bad at crucial moments in Snowball's speeches. Snowball had made a close study of the some back numbers of the farmer and stock breeders, which he had formed in the farmers, and was full of a plan for innovation and improvements. He talked learnedly about the field ranged silage and basic slack, and had worked out a complicated scheme for all the animals to rub the tongues directly in the field at a different spot every day to save the labor of the cartage. Napoleon produced no schemes of his own, but said quietly that the snowballs would come to nothing and seemed to be biding his time. But all of their controversies, none was so bitter as the one that had took place over the windmill. In the long pasture, not far from the farm building, there was a small knoll which was the highest point on the farm. After surveying the ground, Snowball declared that this was just the place for a windmill, which could be made to operate a dynamo and supply the farm with the electrical powers. This would light the stalls and warm them in a winters, and would also run a circular saw, a shaft cutter, and a mingle slices and electric milking machine. The animals had never heard of anything of this kind before, for the farm was an old-fashioned one and had only the most primitive machinery, and they listened to in astonishment while Snowball conjured up pictures of the fantastic machine which would do the work for them while they grazed at their ease in the fields or improve their minds with reading and conversation. Within a few weeks, Snowball's plans for the windmill were fully worked out. The mechanical details came mostly from three books which had belonged to Mr. Jones: 1,000 Useful Things to Do About the Houses, Every Man His Own Bricklayer, and Electricity for Beginners. Snowball used as a study shed which had once used for the incubators and had smooth wooden floor suitable for drawing on. He was closet there for hours at a time with his books held open by the stone, and with a piece of a chalk gripped between the knuckles of his tortoise, he would rapidly, to and fro, drawing in line after line and uttering, little whimpers of excitement. Gradually, the plan grew into a complicated mass of cranks and cogwheels, covering more than half the floor, which the other men were completely unintelligible but very impressive. Probably all of them came to look at Snowball's drawings at least once a day. Even the hens and the ducks came and were at pains not to tread on the chalk mark. Only Napoleon held aloof. He had declared himself against the windmill from the start. One day, however, he arrived unexpectedly to examine the plans. He walked heavily around the sheds, looked closely at every details of the plan, and snuffed at them once or twice. He then stood for a little while contemplating them out of the corner of his eyes. Then suddenly he lifted his leg, urinated over the plans, and walked over without uttering a word. The whole farm was deeply divided on the subject of the windmills. Snowball did not deny that to build it would be a difficult business. Stone would have to be carried and built up into walls. Then the sails would have to be made, and after that there would be need for dynamos and cables. How this were to be, procured. Snowball did not say how this was procured. Snowball did not say, but he maintained that it could all be done in a year, and thereafter he declared so much labor would be saved for that animals would only need to work 3 days a week. Napoleon, on the other hand, argued that the great need of the moment was to increase food production, and that if they wasted time on the windmill, they would all starve to death. The animals formed themselves into two factions under the slogan "Vote for Snowball and 3 days a week," and "Vote for Napoleon and the Full Manger." Benjamin was the only animal who did not side with either faction. He refused to believe either side, either that food will become more plentiful or that the windmill would save us. Windmill or no windmill, he said, life would go on as it would have always been on that is badly. Apart from the disputes over the windmill, there was the questions of the defense of the farm. It was fully realized that though the human beings had been defeated in the Battle of the Cowshed, they might make another and more determined attempt to recapture the farm and reinstate Mr. Jones. They had all the more reasons for doing so because the news of their defeat had spread across the countryside and made the animals on the neighboring farms more restive than ever. As usual, the Snowball and Napoleon were in disagreements. According to Napoleon, what the animals must do was to procure firearms and train themselves in the use of them. According to Snowball, they must send out more and more pigeons and stir up the rebellion among the animals on the other farms. So one argued that if they could not defend themselves, they would bound to be conquered. The other argued if the rebellions happens everywhere, they would have no need to defend themselves. The animals listened first to Napoleon, then to Snowball, and then could not make up their minds which was right. Indeed, they always have found themselves in the agreement with one who was speaking at the moment. This is exactly what happens, right? They're so persuasive, they're so good at speaking that doesn't matter who's speaking. So you will support the person who's speaking at the time. At last, the day came when Snowball's plans were completed. At the meeting on the following Sunday, the question of whether or not to begin work on the big was put to vote. When the animals had assembled in the big yard barns, Snowball stood up and, though occasionally interrupted by bleating from the sheep, and set forth his reasons for advocating the building of the mill. Then Napoleon stood up to reply. He said very quietly that the windmill was a nonsense and that he advised nobody to vote for it, and promptly sat down again. And he had spoken for barely 30 seconds and seems almost indifferent as to the effect he produced. At this, Snowball sprang to his feet and, shouting down the sheep who had begun bleating again, he broke into a passionate appeal in favor of the windmills. Until now, the animals had been apart, equally divided in their sympathies. But in a moment, Snowball's eloquence had carried them away. In a glowing sentence, he painted up pictures of animal farm as it might be when sordid labor was lifted from the animal's back. His imagination had now run far beyond shaft cutters and turnip slices. Electricity, he said, could operate the threshing machines, plow, harrows, rollers, reapers, and binders. Besides supplying every stall with its own electric lights, hot and cold waters, and electric heaters. By the time he had finished speaking, there was no doubt as to which the vote would go. But just at this moment, Napoleon stood up and, casting a peculiar side look at the snowball, uttered a high-pitched whimper of a kind no one had ever heard utter before. At this, there was a terrible baying sound outside. The nine enormous dogs wearing brass. Oh, now this is how his dictatorship starts, okay? This was a terrible baying sound outside, and nine enormous dogs wearing brass studded collars came bounding into the barn. They dashed straight for Snowball, only who sprang from his place just in time to escape their snapping jaws. In a moment, he was out of the door, and they were after him. Too amazed and frightened to speak, all the animals crowded through the door to watch the chase. Snowball was racing across the long pastures that led to the road. He was running as only a pig can run, but the dogs were close on his heels. Suddenly he slipped, and it seemed certain that they had him. Then he was up again, running faster than ever. Then the dogs were gaining on him again. On one of them all but closed his jaws on the Snowball's tails, but Snowball whisked it free just in time. Then he put on extra spurs and a few inches to spare, slipped through a hole in the hedge, and was seen no more. Silent and terrified, the animals crept back into the barn. In a moment, the dogs came bounding back. At first, no one had been able to imagine where these creatures came from, but the problem was soon solved. They were the puppies whom Napoleon had taken away from their mothers and reared privately, though not yet fully grown. They were huge dogs and as fierce looking as wolves. They kept close to Napoleon, so it was noticed that they waged their tails to him in the same way as the other dogs would used to do to Mr. Jones. Napoleon, with the dogs following him, now mounted onto the raised up portion of the floor where Major had previously stood to deliver his speech. He announced that from now on the Sunday morning meetings would come to an end. They were unnecessary, he said, and wasted times. In future, all the questions relating to the working of the farm would be settled by a special committee of pigs presided over him by himself. This would meet in private and afterwards communicate their decision to the others. Animals would still assemble on Sunday mornings to salute the flag, sing Beast of England, and receive their orders for the week, but there would be no more debates. In spite of the shock the Snowball's expulsion had given them, the animals were dismayed by this announcement. Several of them would have protested if they could have found the right arguments. Even Boxer was vaguely troubled. He set his ears back and shook his fur locks several times and tried hard to marshal his thoughts, but in the end he could not think of anything to say. Some of the pigs themselves, however, were more articulate. Four young porkers in the front row uttered shrill sequels of disapproval, and all four of them sprang to their feet and began speaking at once. But suddenly the dogs sitting round Napoleon let out deep, menacing growls, and the pigs fell silent and sat down again. Then the sheep broke out onto a tremendous bleating of a four legs good, two legs bad, which went on for nearly a quarter of an hour and put an end to any chances of discussions. Afterwards, Squealer was sent round the farm to explain the new arrangement to the others. Comrades, he said, I trust that every animal here appreciates the sacrifice that Comrade Napoleon had made in taking his extra labor upon himself. Do not imagine, comrades, that leadership is a pleasure. On the contrary, it is a deep and heavy responsibility. No one believes more firmly than Comrade Napoleon that all animals are equal. He would be only happy to let you take your decision for yourself, but sometimes you might make the wrong decision, comrades, and then where should we be? Suppose you had decided to follow Snowball with his moonshine of windmills. Snowball, who, as we know now, was no better than a criminal. He fought bravely at the Battle of the Cowshed, said somebody. Bravery is not enough, said Squealer. Loyalty and obedience are more important, and as the Battle of the Cowshed, I believe the time will come when we shall find that Snowball's part in this was much exaggerated. Discipline, comrades, iron discipline. That is the watchword for today. One false step and our enemies would be upon us. Surely, comrades, you would not want Jones back. Once again, this argument was unanswerable. Certainly, the animals did not want Jones back, and if the holding of debates on Sunday mornings was liable to bring him back, then debates must stop. Boxers who had now had a hard time to think over and voice the general feeling by saying, if Comrade Napoleon says it, it must be right. And from them on, he adopted the maxim, Napoleon is always right. Okay, so from there he started, okay. And that is the boxer, right? A boxer. Boxer means the strongest, the horse. If Comrade Napoleon says it, it must be right. And from then on, he adopted the maxim, Napoleon is always right. And in addition to his private motto of I will work harder, By this time, the weather had broken and the spring plowing had begun. The shed where Snowball had drawn his plans of the windmills had been shut up, and it was assumed that the plan had been rubbed off the floor. Every Sunday morning at 10 o'clock, the animals assembled in the big barn to receive their orders of the week. The skull of the old major, now clean of flesh, had been disinterred from the orchids and set upon on a stump at the foot of the flagship beside the guns. After the hoisting of the flag, the animals were required to file past the skull in a reverent manner before entering the barn. Nowadays, they did not sit all together as they had done in the past. Napoleon, with a squealer and another pig named Minimus, who had a remarkable gift for composing songs and poems, sat on the front of the raised platforms, with the 9 young dogs forming a semicircle around them, and other pigs sitting behind. The rest of the animals sat facing them in the main body of the barns. Napoleon and read out the orders for the week, and in a gruff soldiery style, and after single singing Beast of the England, all the animals dispersed. On the third Sunday after Snowball's expulsion, the animals were somewhat surprised to hear Napoleon announce that the windmill was to be built after all. He did not give any reasons for having changed his mind, but merely warned the animals that this extra task would mean very hard work. It might be necessary to reduce their rations. The plans, however, had all been prepared down to the last details. A special committee of the pig had been at work upon them for the past 3 weeks. The building of the windmill, with the various other improvements, was expected to take 2 years. That evening, Squealer explained privately to the other animals that Napoleon had never in reality been opposed to the windmills. On the contrary, it was he who had advocated for it in the beginning, and the plan which Snowball had drawn on the floor of the incubator shed had actually been stolen from among Napoleon's papers. The windmill was, in fact, Napoleon's own creation. Why then, ask somebody, had he spoken so strongly against it? Here, Squealer looked very sly. That, he said, was Comrade Napoleon cunning. He had seemed to oppose the windmill simply as a maneuver to get rid of Snowball, who was a very dangerous character and a bad influence. Now that Snowball was out of the way, the plan could go forward without his interference. Then, said Squealer, was something called tactics. He repeated a number of times, tactics, comrade, tactics. Tactics, comrade, tactics. Skipping round and whisking his tail with a merry laugh. The animals were not certain what the word meant, but Squealer spoke so persuasively, and the 3 dogs who happened to be with him growled so threateningly that they accepted his explanation without a further question. Chapter number 6. All that year the animal worked like slaves, but they were happy in their work. They grudged no effort or sacrifice, well aware that everything that they did was for the benefit of themselves and those of their kind who would come after them, and not for a pack of idle, thieving, human beings. Throughout this spring and summer, they worked a 60-hour a week, and in August, Napoleon announced that there would be work on Sunday afternoon as well. This work was strictly voluntary, but any animal who absented himself would have its ration reduced by half. So even so, it was not necessary to leave certain tasks undone. The harvest was little less successful than in the previous years, and 2 fields which should have been sown with roots in the early summer were not sown because the plugging had not been completed early enough, and it was not possible to foresee that the coming winter would be a hard one. The windmill presented unexpected difficulties. There was a good quarry of limestones on the farm, and plenty of sands and cement had been found in one of the outhouses, so that all the material for the building were at hand. But the problem that the animal could not first solve was how to break up the stone into pieces of suitable size. There seemed no way of doing this except with the picks and crowbars, which no animal could use, because no animal could stand on his hind legs. Only after weeks of vain efforts did the right idea occur to somebody, namely to utilize the force of gravity. Huge boulders, far too big to be used as they were lying over the bed of the quarry. The animals lashed ropes round this, and then all together, cows, horses, sheep, and any animal that could lay hold of the rope. Even the pigs sometimes joined in at a critical moment. They dragged them with a desperate slowness up the slope to the top of the quarry, where they were toppled over the edge to shatter it to pieces below. Transporting the stone when it was once broken was comparatively simple. The horses carried out in the cart loads. The sheep dragged single blocks. Even the Muriel and Benjamin yoked themselves into the old governess carts and did their shares. By late summer, a sufficient store of stone had accumulated, and then the building began under the superintendence of a pigs. But it was slow, laborious process. Frequently, it took a whole day of exhausting effort to drag a single boulder to the top of the quarry, and sometimes when it was pushed over the edge, it failed to break. Nothing could have been achieved without Boxer, whose strength seemed equal to that of all the rest of the animals put together. When the boulders began to slip, another animal carried out in despair at finding themselves dragged down the hill. It was always Boxer who strained himself against the rope and brought the boulders to a stop. To see him toiling up this slope inch by inch, his breath coming fast, the tips of his hoofs clawing at the ground, and his great sides matters with his sweat filled everyone with their admiration. Glover warned him sometimes to be careful not to overstrain himself, but Boxer would never listen to her. His two slogans, I will work harder and Napoleon is always right, seemed to him as sufficient answers to all the problems. He had made arrangement with the cockerel to call him a three-quarter of an hour earlier in the morning instead of the half an hour. And in these spared moments, of which there were not many nowadays, he would go alone to the quarry, collect a loads of broken stone, and drag it down on the sides of the windmill unassisted. So the animals were not badly off throughout the summers. In spite of the hardness of the work, if they had no more food than they had in the Jones day, at least they did not less have less. The advantage of the advantage of only having to feed themselves and not having to support five extra vegan human beings as well was so great that it would have taken a lot of failures to outweigh it. And in many ways, the animals' methods of doing things were more efficient and save labor. Such jobs as breeding, for instance, could be done without with a thoroughness impossible to human beings. And again, since no animals now stole, it was necessary defense of the pasture from the arable lands, and which saved lots of labor on the upkeep of hedges and gates. Nevertheless, as the summer wore on, various unforeseen shortages began to make themselves felt. There was a need of a paraffin oil, nails, strings, rocks, biscuits, and iron for the horses' shoes, none of which could be produced on the farm. Later, there would also be need of seeds, artificial manures, beside various tools, and finally the machinery for the windmills. How this were to be procured, no one was able to imagine. One Sunday morning, when the animals assembled to receive their orders, Napoleon announced that he had decided upon a new policy. From now onwards, Animal Farm would engage in the trade with the neighboring farms, not, of course, for any commercial purposes, but simply in order to obtain certain material which were urgently necessary. The needs of the windmill must override everything else, he said. He was therefore making arrangement to sell a stack of hay and part of the current year's wheat crops, and later on, if any money were needed, it would have to be made by the sale of an eggs, for which there was always a market in the Wellingtons. The hen said Napoleon should welcome the sacrifice as their own special contribution towards the building of the windmill. Once again, the animals were conscious of the vague uneasiness, never to have any dealing with the human beings, never to engage in trade, never to make a use of money. Had not this been among the earliest resolution passed at the first triumphant meeting after John was expelled? All the animals remember the passing such a resolution, or at least they thought they had remembered it. The four young pigs who had protested when Napoleon abolished the meeting raised their voices timidly, but they were promptly silenced by the tremendous crowing from the dogs. Then, as usual, the sheep broke into four legs goods, two legs bad, and the momentary awkwardness was smoothed over. Finally, Napoleon raised his trother for silence and announced that he had already made all the arrangements. There would be no need for any of the animals to come to contact with human beings, which would clearly be most undesirable. He intended to take the whole burden upon his own shoulders. Mr. Whymper, a solicitor willing in Wellington, had agreed to act as an intermediary between Animal Farm and the outside world, and would visit the farm every morning or every Monday morning to receive his instructions. Napoleon ended his speech with the usual cry of "Long live Animal Farms!" And after singing the best of the England, the animal were dismissed. Afterwards, Squealer made a round of the farm and set the animals' minds at rest. He assured them that the resolution against engaging in that trade and using money had never been passed or even suggested. It was pure imagination, probably traceable in the beginning to lies circulated by snowballs. A few animals still have felt faintly doubtful, but Squealer asked them shrewdly, "Are you certain that this is not something that you have dreamt, comrades? Have you any record of such a resolution? Is it written down anywhere?" And since it was certainly true that nothing of the kind existed in writing, the animals were satisfied that that they had been mistaken. Every Monday, Mr. Whymper visited the farm as had been arranged. He was a sly-looking little man with a side whisker, a solicitor in a very small way of business, but sharp enough to have realized earlier than anyone that else that Animal Farm would need a broker and that commissions would be worth having. The animals watched his coming and going with a kind of a dread and avoided him as much as possible. Nevertheless, to the side of the Napoleon on all fours, delivering orders to Whymper, who stood on the two legs, roused their pride and partly reconciled them to the new arrangement. The relation with the human race were now not quite the same as they had before. The human beings did not hate Animal Farms any less now than it was preposterous. Indeed, they hated it more than ever. Every human held it as an article of faith that the farm would go bankrupt sooner or later, and above all, that the windmill would be a failure. They would meet in the public houses and prove to one another by means of diagrams that the windmill was bound to fall down, or that it would, if it did stand up, then it would never work. And yet, against their will, they had developed a certain respect of the efficiency with which animals were managing their own affairs. One symptom of this was that they began to call Animal Farm by its proper name and ceased to pretend that it was called the Manor Farm. They'd also dropped the championship of a Jones who had given up hopes of getting his farm back and gone to live another part of the country. Except through Whymper, there was a yes There was as yet no contact between Animal Farm and the Orchard Post, but there were constant rumors that Napoleon was about to enter into a definite business agreement with either with the Mr. Pilkingtons of Foxwoods or Mr. Frederick of Pinchville, but never it was noticed with us both simultaneously. It was about this time that the pig suddenly moved into the farmhouse and took up their residence there. Again, the animal seems to remember that the resolution against this has been passed in the early days, and again, Squealer was able to convince them that this was not the case. It was absolutely necessary, he said, that the pigs who were the brains of the farm should have a quiet place to work in. It was also quiet place to work in, okay, work in. It was also more suited to the dignity of the leaders. For of a late he had been taken to speaking of Napoleon under the title of a leader, to live in a house than in a mere stay. Okay, nevertheless, some of the animals were disturbed when they heard that the pigs not only took their meals in the kitchens and used the drawing room as recreation rooms, but also slept in the beds. Boxer passed it off as usual with Napoleon is always right, but Clover, who thought she remembered a definitive ruling against beds, went to the end of the barns and tried to puzzle out the 7 commandments which were inscribed there. Finding herself unable to read more than individual letters, she fetched Muriel. Muriel, she said, read me the fourth commandment. Does it not say there's something about never sleeping in the bed? So with some difficulty, Muriel spelled it out. It says, no animal shall sleep in a bed with his sheets. She announced finally. Curiously enough, no animal shall sleep in the bed with the sheets. Okay, Clover had not remembered the fourth commandment to mention sheets, but as it was on the wall, it must have done so. And Sweeler, who happened to be passing at the moment, attended by 2 or 3 dogs, was able to put the whole matters in its proper perspective. You have heard them, comrades, she said, that we pigs now sleep in the beds of the farmhouse, and why not? You did not suppose surely that there was ever a ruling against beds. A bed merely means a place to sleep in. A pile of straw in a stall is a bed, properly regarded. The rule was against the sheets, which are the human interventions. We have removed the sheet from the farmhouse beds and sleep between blankets, and we very comfortably beds they are too, but not more comfortable than we need. I can tell you, comrades, with all the brain work we have to do nowadays, you would not rob us of our response repost, would you, comrades? You would not have us too tired to carry out our duties. Surely none of you wishes to see John's back. The animal reassured them on this point immediately, and no more was said about the pig sleeping in the farmhouse beds. And when some days afterwards it was announced that the farm now on the pigs would get up an hour later in the morning than the other animals, no complaint were made about it that either. By the autumn, the animals were tired but happy. They had had a hard year, and after the sale of a part of the hay and the corn, the stores of the food for the winters were none too plentiful. But the windmill compensated for everything. It was almost half built now. And after the harvest, there was a stretch of a clear, dry weather, and animals toiled harder than ever, thinking well worth the while to plow to and for all day with the blocks of the stone. By doing so, they would raise the walls another foot. Boxer would even come out at nights and work for an hour or two on his own by the light of the harvest moons. In the spare moments, the animals would walk round and round the half-finished mills, admiring the strength and perpendicularity of its walls and marveling that they should ever have been able to find anything so imposing. Only old Benjamin refused to grow enthusiastic about windmills, though as usual he would utter nothing beyond a cryptic remark that donkey lived a long life. Long times. November came with the raging southwest winds. Building had to stop because it was now too wet to mix the cements. Finally, there came a night when the gale was so violent that the farm building rocked on the foundation and several tiles were blown off the roof of the barn. The hens woke up squawking with terror, but they had all dreamed simultaneously of hearing a gun go off in the distance. In the morning, the animals came out of their stalls to find that the flax staff had been blown down and an elm tree at the foot of the orchard has been plucked up like a radish. They had just noticed this when a cry of despair broke from every animal throat. A terrible sight had met their eyes. The windmills was in ruins. With one accord, they dashed down to the spot. Napoleon, who seldom moved out of the walk, raced ahead of all of them. Yes, there it is. She, fruits of all struggles. The level to its foundation, the stone they had broken and carried so laboriously scattered all around. Unable to at first to speak, they stood gazing mournfully at the letters of a solemn fallen stone. Napoleon paced to and fro in silence, occasionally snuffling at the ground. His tail had grown rigid and twitched sharply from one side to side, and sighed him of intense mental activity. Suddenly he halted as though his minds were made up. Comrades, he said quietly, do you know who is responsible for this? Do you know the enemy who has come in the night and overthrown our mill Snowball? He suddenly roared in the voice of the thunder. Snowball has done these things in the sheer malignity, thinking to set back our plans and avenge himself of his ignominious expulsion. This traitor has crept in slept here under cover of a night and destroyed our work of nearly a year. Comrades, here and now I pronounce the death sentence upon Snowball. Animal hero, second class, and half a bushel of apples to any animals who brings him to justice, a full bushel to anyone who captures him alive. The animal were shocked beyond measures to learn that even Snowball could be guilty of such an action. There was a cry of indignations that, and everyone began thinking about ways of catching Snowball if he should ever come back. And almost immediately, the footprints of a pig were discovered in the grass at a little distance from the knoll. They could only be traced for a few yards, but appeared to be lead a hole in the hedge. Napoleon snubbed deeply at them and pronounced them to the snowballs. He gave it at his opinion that the snowball had probably came from the direction of the Foxwood Farms. No more delays, comrades, cried Napoleon when the footprints had been examined. So there's work to be done. So this very morning we begin rebuilding the windmills, and we will build all through the winters, rain or shine. We will teach this miserable traders that he cannot undo our work so easily. Remember, comrades, there must be no alteration in our plans. They shall be carried out to the day. Forward, comrades, long live the windmill, long live Animal Farm. So now I could clearly see, right, when you see this kind of a thing, that we don't know what exactly is happening, even in the political discourse, right? It could be anything. We don't know what is happening. So it could be very much possible that what is being shown to us as a public in a political situation, it might not necessarily be the truth, right? It's just a part of a reality, and it's not the full part of reality. It's just a small part of a reality. So we don't know the entire thing. Okay. Now comes chapter number 7, and it talks about it was a bitter winter. The stormy weather was followed by sleet and snow, and then by a hard frost which did not break till we into February. The animal carried on as best they could with the rebuilding of the windmill, while knowing that the outside world was watching them, and that the envious human beings would rejoice and triumph if the mill were not finished on time. Okay, so now we have an extra pressure with respect that they have to complete this on time. Out of these, out of spite, the human being pretended not to believe that it was a snowball who had destroyed the windmill. They said that it had fallen down because the walls were too thin. The animals knew that this was not the case. Still, it had been decided to build the walls 3 feet thick, this time instead of 18 inches as before, which meant collecting much larger quantities of stone. For a long time, the quarry was full of snowdrifts. Nothing could be done. So some progress was made in the dry, frosty weather that followed, but it was a cruel work, and the animals could not feel so hopeful about it as they had felt before. They were always cold and usually hungry as well. Only Boxer and Clover never lost heart. Squealer made excellent speeches on the joy of the service and the dignity of the labor, but the other animals found more inspiration in the Boxer's strength and his never falling cry of "I will work harder." In January, food fell short. The corn rations was drastically reduced, and it was announced that the extra potatoes rations would be issued to make up for it. Then it was discovered that the greater part of the potato crop had been frosted in the clamps, which had not been covered thickly enough. The potatoes had become soft and discolored, and only a few were edibles. For days at a time, the animals had nothing to do eat but chaff and mangoes. Starvation seems to stare them in the face. It was vital. It was vitally necessary to conceal this fact from the outside world. Yes, it's very important. Embodied by the collapse of the windmills, the human beings were inventing fresh lies about Animal Farm. Once again, it was being put out that all the animals were dying of famine and disease, and that they were continually fighting among themselves and had resorted to cannibalisms and infanticides. Napoleon was well aware of the bad result that might follow if the real facts of the food situation were known, and if he decided to make use of Mr. Wimper's to spread contrary impressions. Hitherto, the animals had little or no contact with the Wimpers on his weekly visits. Now, however, with a few selected animals, mostly sheep, were instructed to remark casually in his hearing that the rations had been increased. In addition, Napoleon ordered the almost empty bins in the store shed to be filled nearly to the brim with the sands, which was then covered with what remained of the grain and bills. On some suitable pretext, Wimpers was led through the store shed and allowed to catch a glimpse of the bins. He was received and continued to report to the outside world that there was no food shortage on Animal Farm. I mean, the pigs were smart men. Nevertheless, towards the end of the January, it became obvious that it would be necessary to procure some more grain from somewhere. In these days, Napoleon rarely appeared in public, but spent all his time in the farmhouse, which was guarded at each door by fierce-looking dogs. When he did emerge, it was in ceremonial manners with an escort of 6 dogs who closely surround him and rolled if anyone came too near. Frequently, he did not even appear on Sunday mornings, but issued his orders through one of the other pigs, usually Squealer.
One Sunday morning, Squealer announced that the hens who had just come in a lay, who had come in lay again must surrender their eggs. Napoleon had accepted through Wimpers a contract for 400 eggs a week. The price of this would pay for enough grain and meal to keep the farm going till summer came on and conditions were easier. When the hens heard this, they realized the terrible outcry. They had been warned earlier that this sacrifice might be necessary, but had not believed that it would really will happen. They were just getting their clutches ready for their spring sittings, and they protested that to take the eggs always away now as a murder. For the first time since the expulsion of a Jones, there was something resembling a rebellion led by three young black Monica purits. The hens made a determined effort to thwart Napoleon's wishes. Their method was to fly up to the rafters and there lay their eggs, which smashes to pieces on the floor. Napoleon acted swiftly and ruthlessly. He ordered the hens' rations to be stopped and decreed that any animal giving so much as a grain of a corn to a hen should be punished by death. The dogs saw it too that these orders were carried out. For 5 days, the hens held out. Then they capitulated and went back to their nesting boxes. 9 hens had died in the meantime. Their bodies were buried in the orchards, and it was given out that they had died of coccidiosis. Wimper heard nothing of this affair, and the eggs were duly delivered. A grocer went driving up to the farm once a week to take them away. All this while, no more had been seen of Snowball. He was rumored to be hiding on one of the neighboring farms, either Foxwood or Pinchwolf. Napoleon was this time on a slightly better terms with the other farmers than that. It happened that there was in the yard a pile of timber which had been stacked there 10 years earlier when a beach spinney was declared. It cleared. It was a well-seasoned. Wimper had advised Napoleon to sell it. Both Mr. Pilkington and Mr. Frederick were anxious to buy it. Napoleon was hesitating between the two, unable to make up his mind. It was noticed that whatever seems on the point, coming to an agreement with Frederick, Snowball was declared to be in hiding at Foxwood, while when he inclined towards Pilkington, Snowball was said to be at okay. Well, he inclined towards to this one. Okay, just wait. Snowball was declared to be in the hiding at Foxwood, while he inclined towards Pilkington. Snowball were said to be at Pilkington. Suddenly, early in the spring, and alarming things were discovered. Snowball was secretly frequenting the farm by night. The animals were so disturbed that they could hardly sleep in their stalls. Every night, it was said, he came creeping in under cover of darkness and performed all kinds of mischief. He stole the corn. He upset the milk pails. He broke the eggs. He trampled the seed beds. He gawked the bark of the fruit trees. Whenever anything went wrong, it became usual to attribute the Snowball. If a window was broken or a drain was blocked up, someone was certain to say that Snowball had come in the night and done it. And when the key of the store shed was lost, the whole farm was convinced that Snowball had thrown it down the well. Curiously enough, they went on believing this even after the mislaid key was found under a sack of meal. The cows declared unanimously that Snowball crept into their stalls and milked them in their sleep. The rats, which had been troublesome that winter, were also said to be in league with Snowball. Napoleon decreed that there should be a full investigation into Snowball's activities. With his dog in attendance, he set out and made a careful tour of inspection of the farm buildings and other animals, following at a respectful distance. At every steps, Napoleon stopped and snuffed the ground for traces of Snowball's footsteps, which he said he could detect by the smell. He snuffed in every corner, in the barn, in the cow shed, in the hens' houses, in the vegetable garden, and found traces of the Snowball almost everywhere. He would put his snout to the ground to give several deep sniffs and exclaim in a terrible voice, "Snowball, he has been here. I can smell him distinctively." And at the word "Snowball," all the dogs let out blood curdling growls and showed their side teeth. The animals were thoroughly frightened. It seems to them as though Snowball were some kind of invisible influence, pervading the air about them and menacing them with all kinds of dangers. In the evening, Squealer called them together and with an alarmed expression in his face told them that he had some serious news to report. "Comrades," cried Squealer, making little nervous lips, "a most terrible thing has been discovered. Snowball has sold himself to Frederick of Pinchville Farms, who is now plotting to attack us and take our farm away from us. Snowball is to act as his guide when the attack begins, but there's worse than that. We had thought that Snowball's rebellion was caused simply by his vanity and ambitions, but we were wrong. Comrades, do you know what the real reason was? Snowball was in league with Jones from the very start. He was Jones' secret agent all the time. It has all been proved by the documents which he left behind and which we have only just discovered. To my mind, this explains a great deal. Comrades, did we not see for ourselves how he attempted, fortunately without success, to get us defeated and destroyed at the Battle of the Cowsheds? The animals were
stupefied. This was a wickedness for far outdoing Snowball's destruction of the windmill, but it was some minutes before they could fully take in it. They all remembered or thought they remembered how they had seen Snowball charging ahead of them at the Battle of the Cowsheds, how he had rallied and encouraged them at every turn, and how he had not paused for an instant, even when the pellets from the Jonas guns had wounded his neck. At first, it was a little difficult to see how this fitted in with his, his being Jones' side. Even Boxer, who seldom asked questions, was puzzled. He lay down, tucked his four hooves beneath him, and shut his eyes, and then, with a hard effort, managed to formulate his thoughts. I do not believe that, he said. Snowball fought bravely at the Battle of the Cowsheds. I saw him himself. Did we not give him animal hero first class immediately afterwards? That was our mistake, comrades, for we now know it is all written down in the secret documents that we found, that in reality he was trying to lure us to our dooms. But he was wounded, said Boxer. We all saw him running with the bloods. That was a part of the arrangements, cried Schuyler. Jones' shot only grazed him. I could show you this in his own writing if you were able to read it. The plot was for Snowballs at the critical moment to give the signals for fight and leave the field to the enemy, and he was nearly succeeded. Well, even say, comrades, he would have succeeded if it had not been for our heroic leaders. Comrade Napoleon, do you not remember how just at the moment when Jones and his men had caught inside the yard, Snowball suddenly turned and fled and many animals followed him? And do you not remember too that it was just at that moment when panic was spreading and all seemed lost that Comrade Napoleon sprang forward with a cry for death to humanity and sank his teeth in Jones' leg? Surely you remember that, comrades, exclaimed Squealer, frisking from side to side. Now, when Squealer described the scene so graphically, it seems to the animal that they did remember. At any rate, they remembered that the critical moment of the battle, Snowball had turned to flee, but Boxer was still a little uneasy. I do not believe that Snowball was a traitor at the beginning, he said. Finally, what he has done since is different, but I believe that at the Battle of Cowshed, he was a good comrade, a leader. Comrade Napoleon announced Squealer, speaking very slowly and firmly. He stated categorically, comrade, that Snowball was Jones' agent from the very beginning, yes, and from a long before the rebellion was ever thought of. Ah, that is different, said Boxer. If Comrade Napoleon says it, it must be right. That is a true spirit, comrade, cried Squealer, but it was noticed that he cast a very ugly look at Boxer and his little twinkling eyes. He turned to go and then paused and it said added impressively, I want every animal on this farm to keep his eyes very wide open, for we have reason to think that some of Snowball's secret agents are lurking among us this moment. 4 days later, in the late afternoon, Napoleon ordered all the animals to assemble in the yard. When they were all gathered together, Napoleon emerged from the farmhouse wearing both his medals, for he had recently awarded himself Animal Hero First Class and Animal Hero Second Class, with his 9 huge dogs frisking around him and uttering growl that sent shivers down all the animals' spines. They all, cowered silently in their places and seeming to know in advance that some terrible thing was about to happen. Napoleon stood sternly surveying his audience. Then he uttered a high-pitched whimper. Immediately the dogs bounded forward, seized of the pigs by the ears and dragged him, squealing with the pain and terror, to Napoleon's feet. The pigs' ears were bleeding. The dogs had tasted blood, and for a few moments they appeared to go quite mad. To the amazement of everybody, the three of them flung themselves upon the boxer. The boxer saw them coming and put out his great hook, caught a dog in the mid-ears and pinned him down to the ground. The dog shrieked for mercy, and the other two fled with their tails between their legs. Boxer looked at Napoleon to know whether he had crushed the dog to death or let it go. Napoleon appeared to change countenance and sharply ordered the boxer to let the dog go. When the boxer lifted his hoof and the dog slunk away, bruised and howling, presently the tumult died down. The four pigs waited, trembling with guilt written on every line of their countenance. Napoleon now called upon them to confess their crimes. They were the same four pigs as had protested when Napoleon abolished the Sunday meetings. Without any further prompting, they confessed that they had been secretly in touch with the Snowball ever since his expulsion, that they had collaborated with him in destroying the windmills, and they had entered into an agreement with him to hand over an annual farm to Mr. Frederick. They added that Snowball had privately admitted to them that they had been Jones' secret agent for past years. When they had finished their confession, the dog promptly tore their throats out, and in terrible voice, Napoleon demanded whether any other animal had anything to confess. The three hens who had been the ringleaders in the attempted rebellions over the eggs now came forward and stated that Snowball had appeared to them in a dream and incited them to disobey Napoleon's orders. They too were slaughtered. Then a goose came forward and confessed to having secreted 6 years of corn during the last year's harvest and eaten them in a night. Then a sheep confessed to having urinated in the drinking pool, urged to do this, so she said, by the snowballs, and two sheep confessed to having murdered an old ramster, and especially devoted followers of Napoleon by chasing him in and round a bonfire when he was suffering from a cut. They were all slain on the spot, and so the tale of the confessions and executions went on until they were a pile of corpses lying before Napoleon's feet, and the air was heavy with the smell of blood, which had been unknown there since the expulsion of Jones. When it was all over, the remaining animals, except for the pigs and dogs, crept away in the body. They were shaken and miserable. They did not know which was more shocking, the treachery of the animal who had leagued themselves with a snowball, or the cruel retribution they had witnessed. In the olden days, they had often been seen of blood shed equally terrible, but it seems to all of them it was far worse now than it has happening among themselves. Since Jones had left the farm until today, no animal had killed any another animal. Not even a rat had been killed. They had made their way onto the little knoll where the half-finished windmill stood, and with one accord, they all lay down as though huddling together for a warm. Clover, Muriel, Benjamin, the cows, the sheep, and the whole flock of geese and hens, every one indeed except the cat, who had suddenly disappeared just before Napoleon's ordered the animals to assemble. For some time nobody spoke, only the boxer remained on his feet. He fidgeted to and fro, swishing his long black tail against his sides and occasionally uttering a little whinny of a surprise. Finally he said, I do not understand it. I would not have believed that such a thing could happen on our farms. It must be due to some fault in ourselves. The solution, as I see, is to work harder. From now onward, I shall get up a full hour earlier in the morning. And he moved off his lumbering trot and made for the quarry. Harvey, having got theirs, he collected two successive loads of the stone and dragged them down to the windmill before retiring for the night. The animals hurtled about the clover, not speaking. The knoll, where they were living, gave them a wide prospect across the countries. Most of the animal farm were within their views. The long pasture stretching down to the main roads, to the hayfield, the spinney, the drinking pool, the plugged field where the young wheat was thick and green, and the red roofs of the farm, building with the smoke curling from the chimneys. It was a clear spring evening. The grass and the bursting hedge were gilded by the levels of the rays of the sun. Never had the farm, and with a kind of a surprise they remembered that it was their own farm. Every inch of their own property appeared to the animals so desirable a place. As Clover looked down the hillsides, her eyes filled with the tears. If she could have spotted and spoken her thoughts, it would have been to say that this was not what they had, and they had aimed at what they had set themselves years ago to work for the overthrow of the human race. These scenes of terror and slaughters were not what they looked forward to on to that night when the old major first steered them to rebellion. If she herself had any picture of the future, she had been a society of she had been a society of animals set free from hunger and whip, all equal to each other according to his capacity, the strong protecting the weak, as she had protected the lost brood of the ducklings with her foreleg on the night of the major speech. Instead, she did not know why. They had come to a time when no one dared speak his mind, when fierce, growling dogs roamed everywhere, when you had to watch your comrades torn to pieces after confessing to shocking crimes. There was no thought of rebellion or disobedience in her mind. She knew that even as things were, they were far better than they had been in the days of Jones, that they, before all else, it was needful to prevent the returns of the human beings. Whatever happened, she would remain faithful, work hard, carry out the orders that were given to her, and accept the leadership of Napoleon. But still, it was not for this that she had, or that animal had hoped and toiled. It was not for this that they had built the windmill and faced the bullets of the Jones guns. Such were her thoughts, though she lacked the words to express them. At last, feeling this to be in some way a substitute of the words she was unable to find, she began to sing Beast of England. The other animals sitting round her took it up, and they sang it 3 times over, very tunefully but slowly and mournfully, in a way that they had never sung it before. They had just finished singing it for the third time when Squealer, attended by 2 dogs, approached them with the air of having something important to say. He announced that by a special decree of Comrade Napoleon, Beast of England had been abolished. From now onwards, it was forbidden to sing it. The animals were taken aback. Why, crude Muriel? Okay, no, why, cried Muriel. It's no longer needed, comrade, said Squealer stiffly. Beast of England was the song of the rebellions, but the rebellion is not completed. The execution of the traitors this afternoon was the final act. The enemy, both external and internal, has been defeated. In the Beast of England, we express our longing for a better society in days to come, but the society has now been established. Clearly, the song has no longer any purpose. Frightened though they were, some of the animals might possibly have protested, but at this moment the sheep set up the usual bleating of 4 legs good to 2 legs bad, which went on for several minutes and put an end to the discussion. So Beast of England was heard no more. In its place, Minimus, the poet, had composed another song which began
Animal farm, never through me shall you come to harm. And this was sung every Sunday morning after the hoisting of the flags. But somehow neither the words nor the tune ever seemed to the animals to come up to Beast of England's. Chapter number 8. A few days later, when the terror caused by the execution had died down, some of the animals remembered or thought they remembered that the sixth commandment decreed no animal shall kill any other animals. And though no one cared about to mention in the hearing of the pigs or the dogs, it was felt that the killings which had uh, taken place did not square with this. Clover asked Benjamin to read her the six commandments, and when Benjamin, as usual, said that he refused to meddle in such matters, she fetched Muriel. Muriel read the commandments for her. It ran, "No animal shall kill any other animal without a cause." Somehow or other, the last two words had slipped out of the animal's memory, but they saw now that the commandments had not been violated, for clearly there was a good reasons for killing the traitors who had leagued themselves with the snowball. Throughout the year, the animal worked even harder than they had worked in the previous years to rebuild the windmill with walls twice as thick as before, and had to finish it by the appointed days. Together with the regular work of the farm, there was a tremendous labor. There were times when it seems to the animal that they worked longer hours and fed no better than they had done in Jones days. On Sunday morning, Squealer, holding down a long strip of paper with his trotter, would read out to them the list of figures proving that the production of every class of the foodstuff had increased by 200%, the 300%, or 500%, as the case might be. The animals saw no reason to disbelieve him, and especially as they could no longer remember very clearly what conditions had been like before the rebellion. All the same, there were days when they felt that they would sooner have had less figure and more food. All the orders were now issued through Squealer or one of the other pigs. Napoleon himself was not seen in public as often as once in a fortnight. And when he did appear, he was attended not only by his retinue of dogs, but by a black cockerel who marched in front of him and acted as a kind of a trumpeter, letting out a loud cock, a doodle-doo before Napoleon spoke. Even in the farmhouse, it was said Napoleon inhabited a separate department from the others. He took his meal alone with his two dogs to wait upon him, and always ate from the Crown Derby dinner services which had been in the glass cupboard in the drawing room. It was also announced that the gun would be fired every year on Napoleon's birthdays as well as on the other two anniversaries. Napoleon was now never spoken of simply as a Napoleon. He was always referred to as informal style as our leader, Comrade Napoleon, and the Pigs liked to invent for him such title as the father of all animals, terror of mankind, protector of the sheepfold, ducklings fried, and the like. In his speech, Squealer would talk, with the tears rolling down his cheeks of Napoleon wisdoms, the goodness of his heart, and deep love he poured to all animals everywhere, even and especially the unhappy animals who still lived in ignorance and slavery on the other farms. It had become usual to give Napoleon the credit for every successful achievement and every stroke of a good fortune. You would often hear one hand remark to another. Under the guidance of their leaders, Comrade Napoleon had laid 5 eggs in 6 days, and or two cows, enjoying a drink at the pool, would exclaim, "Thanks the leadership of the Comrade Napoleon. How excellent this water tastes." The general feeling on the farm was well expressed in a poem entitled Comrade Napoleon, which was composed by the Minimist, which ran as follows: Friend of fatherless, fountain of happiness, Lord of the swill buckets, oh how my soul is honest. Fire when I gaze at you, calm and commanding eyes, like the sun in the sky. Comrade Napoleon, you are the giver of all that you creatures love. Full belly twice a day, clean straw to roll upon, every beast great or small, sleep at peace in his stall. You, okay, watches over, Comrade Napoleon. Had I a sucking pig, ere he had grown as big, even as a point bottle or as a rolling pin, he should have learned to be faithful and true to you. Yes, his first squeak should be Comrade Napoleon's. So this is how the narrative works, right? And this is true even in the real life, what is happening. Napoleon approved of this poem and caused it to be inscribed on the wall of the big barn at the opposite end of the Seven Commandments. It was surmounted by a portrait of Napoleon in profile executed by Squealer in white paint. Meanwhile, through the agency of a Wimper, Napoleon was engaged in a complicated negotiation with the Frederick and Pilkingtons. The pile of timber was still unsold, of the two, Frederick was the more anxious to get hold on next, and but he would not offer a reasonable price. At the same time, there were renewed rumors that Frederick and his men were plotting to attack animals farms and to destroy the windmills, the building of which had been aroused as furious jealousy in him. Snowball was known to be still skulking on a Pinfield farms. In the middle of the summer, the animals were alarmed to hear that the three hens had come forward and confessed that, inspired by Snowball, they had entered into a plot to murder Napoleon. They were executed immediately, and fresh precautions for Napoleon's safety were taken. 4 dogs guarded his bed at night, one at each corner, and a young pig named Pinkia was given the task of tasting all his food before he ate it, lest it should be poisoned. Oh my god, man. At about the same time, it was given out that Napoleon had arranged to sell the pile of the timber to Mr. Pilkington. He was also going to enter into a regular agreement for the exchange of a certain products between the animal farm and Foxwoods. To the relationship between Napoleon and Pilkington, though they were only conducted through vampires, were now almost friendly. The animals distrusted Pilkington as a human being, but greatly preferred him to Frederick, whom they both feared and hated. As the summer wore on and the windmill neared completion, the rumors of an impending treacherous attack grew stronger and stronger. Frederick, it was said, intended to bring against them 20 men, all armed with guns, and he had already bribed the magistrate and police so that if he could once get hold of the title deeds of the animal farm, they would ask no questions. Moreover, the terrible stories were leaking out the farm Penfield about the cruelties that Frederick practices upon his animals. He had flogged an old horse to death. He starved his cows. He had killed a dog by throwing it in the furnace. He amused himself in the evening by making cocks fight with the splinters of a razor blade tied to their spurs. The animals' blood boiled with rage when they heard of these things being done to their comrades, and sometimes they clamored to be allowed to go on to bloody and attack painful farms to drive out the humans and set the animals free. But Squealer counseled them to avoid rash actions and trust in comrade Napoleon's strategy. Nevertheless, feeling against Frederick continued to run highest. One Sunday morning, Napoleon appeared in the barn and explained that he had never had any time contemplated selling the pile of timber to Frederick. He considered it beneath his dignity, he said, to have dealings with scoundrels of that description. The pigeon who was still sent out to spread tiding of the rebellion were forbidden to set foot anywhere on the Foxwoods and were also ordered to drop their former slogans of death to humanity in favor of a death to Frederick. In the late summer, yet another of Snowball's mechanization was laid bare. The wheat crop was full of weeds, and it was discovered that on one of his nocturnal visits, Snowball had mixed wheat seeds with a seed corn. A grandeur who had been privy to the plot had confessed his guilt to Squealers and immediately committed suicide by swallowing deadly nightshade berries. The animals now also learned that Snowball had never, as many of them had believed hitherto, received the order of an animal hero first class. This was merely a legend which has been spread some time after the Battle of the Cowshed by Snowball himself. So far from being decorated, he had been censored for showing cowardice in the battle. Once again, some of the animals heard this with a certain bewilderment. But Squealers were soon able to convince them that their memories had been at fault. In the autumn, but tremendous, exhausting efforts for the harvest had to be gathered at almost the same time. The windmill was finished. The machinery had still not, still to be installed, and Wimper was negotiating the purchase of it. But the structure was completed in the teeth of every difficulty, in spite of any experiences of primitive implements of a bad luck and Snowfall's treachery. The work has been finished punctually to the very day. Tired out but proud, the animals walked round and round with their masterpiece, which appeared even more beautiful in the eyes than when it had been built the first time. Moreover, the walls were thick as twice as before. Nothing short of any explosives would lay them down this time, lay them low this time. And when they thought of how they had labored, what discouragement they had overcome, and the enormous differences that would make in their lives when the sails were turning and the dynamos running, when they thought of all this, tiredness forsook them, and they gamboled around and round in the windmill, uttering cries of triumph. Napoleon himself, attended by these dogs and his cockerels, came down to inspect the completed work. He personally congratulated the animals on their achievements and announced that their mills would be named Napoleon Mill. 2 days later, the animals were called together for a special meeting in the barn. They were struck dumb with a surprise when Napoleon announced that he had sold the pile of timber to Frederick. Tomorrow, Frederick's wagons would arrive and begin carting it away. Throughout the whole period of his seeming friendship with the Pilkingtons, Napoleon had already been in secret agreement with the Frederick. All relation with the Foxwood had begun broken off. Insulting messages had been sent to Pilkingtons. The pigeons had been told to avoid Pinchfield Farm and to alter their slogans from death to Frederick to death to Pilkingtons. And at the same time, Napoleon assured the animal that The stories of an impending attack on Animal Farm were completely untrue, and that the tales about Frederick's cruelty to his own animals had been greatly exaggerated. All these rumors had probably originated with Snowball and his agents. It now appeared that Snowball was not, after all, hiding on Pinchville Farms, and in fact had never been there in his life. He was living in considerable luxury, so it was said, at Foxwood, and had in reality been a pensionist of a Pilkington for years past. The pigs were in ecstasies over Napoleon Cunning, were seeming to be friendly with the Pilkingtons. He had forced Frederick to raise his price by £12 by the superior quality of Napoleon's wine. Said Squillers was shown in the fact that he trusted nobody, but even not even Frederick. Frederick had wanted to pay for the timbers with something called a check, which it seems was a piece of a paper with a promise to pay written upon it. But Napoleon was too clever for him, and he had demanded the payment in real £5 notes, which were to be handed over before the timber was removed. Already Frederick had paid up, and the sum he had paid was just enough to buy the machinery for the mill. Meanwhile, the timber was being carted away at a high speed. When it was all gone, another special meeting was held in the barns for the animals to inspect Frederick banknotes, smiling beautifully, beautifully, beatifically, and wearing both his decoration. Napoleon reposed on a bed of straw on the platforms with the money at his sides, neatly piled on a china dish from the farmhouse kitchens. The animals filled slowly past, and each gazed his fill. And Boxer put out his nose to sniff at the banknotes, and the flimsy white thing steered and rustled in his bread. 3 days later, there was a terrible hullabulla. Whimper, his face deadly pale, came racing up the path on his bicycle, flung it down in the yard, and rushed straight to the farmhouse. And the next moment, a choking roar of rage sounded from Napoleon's apartment. The news of what had happened spread around the farm like a wildfire. The banknotes were forgeries. Frederick had got the timber for nothing. Napoleon called the animals together immediately and in terrible voice pronounced the death sentence upon Frederick. When captured, he said Frederick should be boiled alive. At the same time, he warned them that after his treacherous deed, the worst was to be expected. Frederick and his men might make their long expected attack at any moment. Sentinels were placed at all approaches of the farms. In addition, 4 pigeons were sent to Foxwoods with a conciliatory message, which it was hoped might re-establish good relations with the Pilkingtons. The very next morning, the attack came. The animals were at breakfast when the lookouts came racing. In what the news, Frederick and his followers had already come through the 5 barred gates. Boldly enough, the animals sallied through forward to meet them, but this time they did not have the easy victory that they had once in a battle of Cowship. There were 15 men with half a dozen guns between them, and they opened fire as soon as they got within 50 yards. The animals could not face the terrible explosions and the stinging pellets, and in spite of the experts of Napoleon and Boxer rally them, they were soon driven back. A number of them were already wounded. They took refuge in the farm building and peeped cautiously out from the chinks and knot holes. The whole of the big pastures, including the windmill, was in the hands of the enemy. For the moment, even Napoleon seemed at lost. He paced up and down without a word, his tail rigid and twitching. Wistful glances were sent in the direction of Foxwoods. If Pilkingtons and his men would help them, the day might yet be won. But at this moment, the 4 pigeons who had been sent out on the day before returned. One of them bearing a scrap of paper from Pilkington's. On it was penciled those words, "Serves you right." Meanwhile, Frederick and his men had halted about the windmill. The animals watched them, and a murmur of dismay went round. 2 of the men had produced a crowbar and a sledgehammer. They were going to knock the windmills down. "Impossible!" cried Napoleon. "We have built the wall for too thick for that. They could not knock it down in a week. Courage, comrades!" But Benjamin was watching the movement of the men intently. The two with the hammer and the crowbar were drilling a hole in near the base of the windmill. Slowly, with an air almost of an amused, Benjamin nodded his long muzzles. "I thought so," he said. "Do you not see what they are doing? In another moment, they are going to pack blasting powder into that holes. To terrify the animals wasted, it was impossible now to venture out of the shelters of the buildings. After a few minutes, the men were seen to be running in all directions. Then there was a deafening roar. The pigeons squirreled into the air, and all the animals except Napoleon flung themselves flat on their bellies and hid their faces. When they caught up again, a huge cloud of black smoke was hanging where the windmill had been. Slowly, the breeze drifted it away. The windmill had ceased to exist. At this sight, the animals' courage returned to them. So the fear and the despair they had felt a moment earlier were drowned in their rage against this vile, contemptible act. A mighty cry for vengeance went up, and without waiting for further orders, they charged forth in a body and made straight for the enemy. This time they did not heed the cruel pellets that swept over them like a hail. It was a savage, bitter battle. The man fired again and again and again, and all the animals. And when the animals got closer to quarters, lashed out their sticks and sticks and their heavy boots cow, 3 ships, and two geese were killed, and nearly everyone was wounded. Even Napoleon, who was directing operations from the rear, had the tips of his tail chipped by a pellet. But the men did not go unscathed. The three of them had their heads broken by the blows from the boxer's hoof. Another was gored on the belly of a cow's horns. Another had his trousers nearly torn up by Jesse and Bluebell. And when the 9 dogs of the Napoleon-owned bodyguard, whom he had instructed to make a detour under the cover of the hedge, suddenly appeared on the men's flank, being ferociously, panic overtook them, and they saw that they were in danger of being surrounded. Frederick shouted to his men to get out while the going was good, and the next moment the cowardly enemy was running for dear life. The animal chased them right down to the bottom of the field and got in some last kicks at them as they forced their way through the thorn hedge. They had wands, but they were weary and bleeding. Slowly they began to limp back towards the farm. The sight of their dead comrades stretched upon the grass moved up some of them to tears, and for a little while they halted in sorrowful silence at the place where the windmill had once stood. Yes, it was gone. Almost the last trace of their labor was gone. Even the foundations were partially destroyed, and in rebuilding it, they could not this time, as before, they make use of the fallen stones. This time the stones had vanished too. The forces of the explosion had flung them to a distance of hundreds of yards. It was as though the windmills had never been. As they approaches the farm, Squiller, who had unaccountably been absent during the fighting, came skipping towards them, whisking his tail and beaming with satisfaction, and then the animal heard from the direction of the farm buildings the solemn booming of a gun. What is that gun firing for? Said Boxer. To celebrate our victory, cried Squiller. What victory? Said the Boxer. His knees were bleeding, he had lost a shoe and split his hoof, and a dozen pellets had lodged themselves in his wind leg. What victory, comrades? Have we not driven the enemy of our soil, the sacred soil of Animal Farm? So, I mean, you do have to declare victory. It doesn't matter, right? Okay, that's what happens in a war. You want to declare any. If you say that we have lost the war, then obviously the morale of the people will be less, and there will be a revolution, and then. But they have destroyed the windmill, and we have worked on it for 2 years. What matters? We will build another windmill. We will build 6 windmills if we feel like it. You do not appreciate, comrade, the mighty thing that we have done. The enemy was in occupation of this very grounds that we stand upon, and now, thanks to the leadership of the comrade Napoleon, we have won every inch of it back again. Then we have won back what we have, we had before, said Boxist. Then we have won on this one. That is our victory, said Squiller. They limped into the yard, their pellets under the skin of a boxer legs. Smart met painfully. He saw ahead of him the heavy labor of rebuilding the windmill from the foundations, and already in imaginations he braced himself for the task. But for the first time it occurred to him that he was 11 years old, and that perhaps his great muscles were not quite what they had once been. But when the animal saw the green flag flying, then heard the gun fire again, and 7 times it was fired in all, and heard the speech that Napoleon made, congratulating them on their conduct, it did seem to them, after all, that they had won a great victory. The animals slain in the battle were given a solemn funeral. Boxer and Clover pulled a wagon which served as a hearse, and Napoleon himself walked out the head of the processions. 2 whole days were given over to celebrations. There were songs, speeches, and more firing of the guns, and a special gift of an apple was bestowed on happy animals, with 2 ounces of the corn for each bird and 3 biscuits for each dog. It was announced that the battle would be called the Battle of the Windmill, and that Napoleon had created a new decoration, the Order of the Green Banner, which he had conferred upon himself. In the general rejoicing, an unfortunate affair of the banknotes were forgotten. It was few days later that the pigs came upon a case of the whiskey in the cellars of the farmhouse. It had been overlooked at the time when the house was first occupied. That night there came from the farmhouse the sound of the loud singing, in which everyone was surprised the strains of the Beast of England were mixed up. At about 9:30, Napoleon, wearing an old bowler hat of the Mr. Jones, was distinctly seen to emerge on the back door, gallop rapidly round the yards, and disappears indoors again. But in the morning, a deep silence hung over the farmhouse. Not a pig appeared to be stirring. It was nearly 9 o'clock when Squealer made his appearance, walking slowly and dejectedly, his eyes dull, his tail hanging limply behind him, and with every appearance of being seriously ill. He called the animals together and told them that he had a terrible piece of news to impart. Comrade Napoleon was dying. A cry of lamentations went up. Straw was laid down outside and outside the doors of the farmhouse, and the animals walked on tiptoes. With tears in their eyes, they asked one another what they had done, what they should do if their leaders were taken away from them. A rumor went around first that Snowball had, after all, contrived to introduce the poison into Napoleon's food. At 11 o'clock, Squealer came out to make another announcement as his last act upon earth. Comrade Napoleon had pronounced a solemn decree. The drinking of alcohol was to be punished by death. By the evening,
However, Napoleon's appeared to be somewhat better, and the following morning, Squealer was able to tell them that he was well on the way to recovery. By the evening of that day, Napoleon was back at work, and on the next day, it was learned that he had instructed Whymper to purchase in Wellington some booklets on brewing and distilling. A week later, Napoleon gave orders that this small paddocks beyond the orchards, which it had previously been intended to set aside as a grazing ground for the animals who were past work, was to be plugged up. It was given out that the pasture were exhausted and needed reseeding, but it soon became known that Napoleon intended to sow it with a parley. But this time that there occurred a strange incident which hardly anyone was able to understand. One night at about 12 o'clock, there was a loud crash in the yard, and the animals rushed out over the stalls. It was a moonlit night. At the foot of the end wall of the big barn where the seven commandments were written, there lay a ladder broken in the two pieces. Squealer, temporarily stunned, was sprawling beside it, and near at hand there lay a lanterns, a paintbrush, and an overturned spot of the white paint. The dogs immediately made a ring round Squealer and escorted him back to the farmhouse. As soon as he was able to walk, none of the animals could form any ideas as to what this meant, except old Benjamin, who nodded his muzzle and with a knowing air and seemed to understand that, but would say nothing. But a few days later, Muriel, reading over the seven commandments to herself, noticed that there was yet another of them which the animal had remembered wrong. They had thought the fifth amendment was no animal shall drink alcohol, but there were two words that they had forgotten. Actually, the commandment read, no animal shall drink alcohol to excess. Okay, so now everything's have changed. Chapter number 6. Chapter number 9. Okay, I'm sorry. Boxer's split hoof was a long time in healing. They had started the rebuilding of the windmill. The day after the victory celebrations were ended, Boxer refused to take even a day off work and made it a point of honor not to let it be seen that he was in pain. In the evening, he would admit privately to Clover that the hoof troubled him a great deal. So Clover treated, the hoof. Clover treated the hoof with the poulticed of the herbs which he prepared by chewing them, and both she and Benjamin urged Boxer to work less hard. A horse lung do not last forever, and she said to him, but Boxers would not listen. He said, only one real ambition left, to see the windmill well underway before he reached the age of the retirement. At the beginning, when the laws of the animal farm were first formulated, the retiring age had been fixed for horses and pigs at 12, for cows at 14, for dogs at 9, for sheep at 7, and for hens and geese at 5. Liberal old age pensions had been agreed upon, status yet no animals had actually retired on pensions, but of the late the subject had been discussed more and more. Now that the small field beyond the orchid been set aside for the barley, it was rumored that a corner of the large pasture was to be fenced off and turned into grazing ground for superannuated animals. For the horse, it was said the pension would be 5 pounds of corn a day, and in winter 15 pounds of hay, with a carrot or possibly an apple on a public holiday. The Boxer's 12th party was due in the late summer of the following years, and meanwhile the life was hard. The winter was cold as the last one had been, and food was even shorter. So once again, all the rations were reduced, and except those of the pigs and the dogs, and a too rigid equality in rations, Squealer explained, would have been contrary to the principle of the animalisms. In any cases, he had no difficulty in proving to the other animals that they were not in reality a short of food. Whatever the appearance might be, for the time being, certainly it had been found necessary to make readjustments of the rations. Squealer always spoke of it as readjustments, never as reductions. But in comparison with the days of the Jones, the improvement was enormous. Reading out the figures in a shrill, rapid voice, he proved to them in details that they had more oats, more hay, more turnips. They had in Jones' days that they had worked shorter hours, that their drinking water was of a better quality, and that they lived longest, and the larger proportion of the younger ones survived infancy, and that they had more straw in their stalls and suffered less from the fleas. The animals believed every word of it. Truth to tell, Jones and all he stood for had almost faded out of their memories. They knew that life nowadays was harsh and bare, that they were often hungry and often cold, and now that they were usually working when they were not asleep. But doubtless it had been worse in old days. They were glad to believe so. Besides, in those days, they had been slaves, and now they were free and made all the differences, as Squealer did not fail to point out. There were many more mouths to feed now. In the autumn, the four sows had all the littered, but simultaneously producing 31 young pigs between them. The young pigs were
piebald, and as Napoleon was the only boy on the farm, it was possible to guess at their parentage. It was announced that later, when brick and timber had been purchased, a schoolroom would be built in the farmhouse garden. For the first time being, young pigs were given their instruction by Napoleon himself in the farmhouse kitchens. They took their exercise in the gardens and were discouraged from playing with the other young animals. And about this time too, it was laid down as a rule that when a pig and any other animal okay when any other animal met on a path, the other animal must stand aside, and also that all the pigs of whatever degree would have the privilege of wearing green ribbons on their tails on Sundays. The farm had had a fairly successful years, but was still short of money. There were the bricks and sands and the lime for the schoolrooms to be purchased, and it would be necessary to begin saving up again for the machinery for the windmill. Then there were lamp oil and candles for the house, sugar for Napoleon's own tables. If he forbid this to the pigs and other pigs on the ground that this made them fat, and on the and all the usual replacements such as tools, nails, strings, coals, wire, scrap irons, and dog biscuits, a stump of hay and a part of the potato crops was sold up, and the contract for the eggs were increased to 600 a week, so that year the hens barely barley hatched enough chickens to keep their numbers at the same level. Ration reduced in December. They were reduced again in February, and lanterns in the stalls were forbidden to save oils. But the pigs seems to comfortable enough, and in fact they were putting on weights if anything. On one afternoon in February, late February, a warm, rich, appetizing scent such as the animals had never smelled before wafted itself across the yard from the little brew house which had been disused in John's time and which stood beyond the kitchen. Someone said it was the smell of a cooking barley. The animals sniffed the air hungrily and wondered whether a warm mash was being prepared for their supper. But no warm mash appeared, and on the following day it was announced that from now onwards all barley would be reserved for the pigs. The field beyond the orchards had already been sown with barley, and that the news soon leaked out that every pig was now receiving a ration of a pint of a beer daily, with a half of a gallon for Napoleon himself, and which was always served to him in the Crown Derby soup turpin. But if there were hardship to be borne, they were partly offset by the fact that life nowadays had a greater dignity than it had before. There were more songs, more speeches, more processions. Napoleon had commanded that once a week there should be held something called as spontaneous demonstrations, the object of which was to celebrate the struggle and triumphs of an animal farm. At the appointment time, the animal would leave their work and march around the presence of the farm in the military formations, and with the pigs leading, then the horse, then the cows, and then the sheep, and then the poultry. The dogs flanked the processions at the head of the all march. Napoleon's black cockerels, boxer, and clovers always carried them between them in a green banner marked with the hoof and the horn and the captions. Long live Comrade Napoleon. After war, there were recitations of the poem composed of Napoleon's honest and a speech by Schuyler giving particulars of the latest increase in the production of the foodstuffs, and on occasion a shot fired from the gun. The sheep were the greatest devotees of the spontaneous demonstration, and if anyone complained, as a few animals sometimes did, when no pigs or dogs were near, then that they wasted times and meant a lot of standing apart in the cold. The sheep were sure to silence him with a tremendous bleating of a four legs goods, two legs bats, by and large the animals enjoyed these celebrations. They found it comforting to be reminded that after all they were truly their own masters, and that that they did was for their own benefits. So that when the songs, the processions, the squealers list of figures, the hundreds of the guns, the scrawling of the crocodiles, and the fluttering of the flag, they were able to forget that their bellies were empty at least part of the time.
In April, Animal Farm was proclaimed as a republic, and it became necessary to elect a president. So there was only one candidate, Napoleon, was elected unanimously. On the same day, it was given out that the fresh documents has been discovered, which revealed further details about the Snowball's complicity with the Jones. It now appeared that Snowball had not, as the animal had previously imagined, merely attempted to lose the battle of the cowship by means of stratagem, but had been openly fighting on Jones' side. In fact, it was he who had actually been the leader of the human force and had charged into the battle with the words "Long live humanity" on his lips. The wounds on Snowball's back, with a few of the animals still remembered to have seen, and had been inflicted by Napoleon's teeth. In the middle of the summer, Moses the raven suddenly reappeared on the farm. After an absence of several years, he was quite unchanged, still didn't know work, and talked in the same strain as ever about sugar candy mountains. He would perch on a stump, flap his black wings, and talk by the hour to anyone who would listen. Up there, comrades, he would say solemnly, pointing to the sky with his large beak. Up there, just on the other side of that dark cloud, you can see there it lies, sugar candy mountains, that happy country where we poor animals still shall rest forever from our labors. He even claimed to have been there on one of his higher flights, and to have seen the everlasting fields of the clover and the linseed cake and lump sugar growing on the hedges. Many of the animals believed him. They were, their lives now, their reasons were hungry and laborious. Was it not right and just that a better world should exist somewhere else? A thing that was difficult to determine was the attitude of the pigs towards Moses. They all declared contemptuously that his stories about sugar candy mountains were all lies, and yet they allowed him to remain on the farm, not working with an allowances of a gill or of a beer a day. After his hoof that healed up, the boxer worked harder and harder, harder than ever. So indeed, all animals worked like a slaves that year. Apart from the regular work of the farm and the rebuilding of the windmill, there was the schoolhouse for the young pigs, which was started in March. Sometimes the long hours on the insufficient foods were hard to bear, but Boxer never, faltered. Nothing that he said or did was there any sign that his strength was not what it had been. It was only his appearance that was a little altered. His hide was less shiny and than it had been, it had used to be, and his great haunches seems to have shrunken. The other side, Boxer will pick up when spring grass comes on, but the spring came and Boxer grew no fatter. Sometimes on the slope leading to the top of the quarry, when he braced his muscle against the weight of some vast boulder, it seems that nothing kept him on his feet except the except that he will except he will continue. At such times, his lips were seen to form the words, "I will work harder." He had no voice left. Once again, Clover and Benjamin warned him to take care of his health, but Boxer paid no attention. His 12th birthday was approaching. He did not care what happened so long as a good store of the stone was accumulated before he went on pensions. Late one evening in the summer, a sudden rumor ran around the farm that something had happened to Boxer. He had gone out alone to drag a load of stone down to the windmill, and sure enough, the rumor was true. A few minutes later, two pigeons came racing in with the news. Boxer has fallen. He is lying on his side and can't get up. About half the animals on the farm rushed out to the knoll where the windmill stood. There lay Boxer between the shafts of the cart, his neck stretched out, unable to even to raise his head. His eyes were glazed, his sides matted with his sweat. A thin stream of blood had trickled out of his mouth. Clover dropped to her knees at his side. "Boxer," she cried, "how are you?" "It is my lung," said the boxer in a weak voice. "It does not matter. I think you will be able to finish the windmill without me. There's a pretty good store of stone accumulated, so I had only another month to go in any case. To tell you the truth, I'd been looking forward to my retirement, and perhaps as Benjamin is growing old too, they will let him retire at the same time and be a companion to me. We must get help at once," said Clover. "Run, somebody, and tell Squealer what has happened." All the other animals immediately raced back to the farmhouse to give the squealer the news. Only Clover remained, and Benjamin, who lay down at the boxer's sides and without speaking kept the flies of him off him with his long tail. After about a quarter of an hour, Squealer appeared, full of sympathy and concern. He said that the comrade Napoleon had learned with the very deepest distress of this misfortunes to one of the most loyal workers on the farm, and was already making arrangement to send Boxer to be treated in the hospital at Wellington. The animals felt a little uneasy at this, except for Molly and Snowball. No other animal had ever left the farm, and they did not like to think of their sick comrade in the hands of the human beings. However, Squealer easily convinced them that that veterinary surgeon in Wellington could treat Boxer's case more satisfactorily than could be done on the farms. And about half an hour later, when Boxer had somewhat recovered, he was with difficulty got on his feet and managed to limp back to his stall, where Clover and Benjamin had to prepare a good bed of a straw for him. For the next days, Boxer remained in his stall. The pig sav had sent out a larger bottle of a pink medicines which they had found in the medicines chest in the bathroom, and Clover administered it to Boxer twice a day after the meal. In the evening, she lays in his stalls and talked to him, while Benjamin kept the flies off him. Boxer professed not to be sorry for what has happened, and if he made a good recovery, he might expect to live another 3 years, and he looked forward to the peaceful days that he would spend in the corner of the big pasture. It would be the first time that he had had leisure to study and improve his mind. He intended, he said, to devote the rest of his life to learning and the remaining 22 letters of the alphabet. However, Benjamin and Clover could only be with Boxer after working hours, and it was in the middle of the day when the van came to take him away. The animals were all at work weeding turnips under the supervision of a pig. When they were astonished to see Benjamin come galloping from the direction of the farm buildings, braying at the top of his voice. It was the first time that they had never seen Benjamin excited. Indeed, it was the first time that anyone had ever seen him gallop. Quick, quick! He shouted. Come at once. They are taking Boxer away. Without waiting for orders from the twig, the animals broke off work and raced back to the farm building. Sure enough, there in the yard was a large closed van drawn by two horses, with the lettering on its sides and a sly-looking man in the low-crowned bordered hat sitting on the driver's seat. And the Boxer's stall was empty. The animal crowded round the van. Goodbye, Boxer. The chorused goodbye. Fools, fools, shouted Benjamin, prancing around them and stamping the earth with his small hoofs. Fools, do you not see what is written on the side of the van? That gave the animal a pause, and there was a hush. Muriel began to spell out the words, but Benjamin pushed her aside, and in the midst of a deadly silence, he read, Alfred Cement, Horse Slaughter and Glue Boiler, Wellington, dealer in hides and bone mealers. Kennel Supply. Do you not understand what that means? They are taking Boxer to the knacker. A cry of horror burst from all the animals. At this moment, the man on the box whipped up his horses, and the van moved out of the yard at one smart trot. All the animals followed, crying out at the tops of their voices. Clover forced her way to the front. The van began to gather speed. Clover tried to steer her stout limbs to a gallop and achieved a canter. Boxer, she cried, Boxer, Boxer, Boxer. And just at this moment, and though he had heard the uproar outside, the Boxer's face with the wide, stripe down his nose and appeared at the small window at the back of the van. Boxer, cried Clover in a terrible voice. Boxer, get out, quickly. They're taking you to your death. All the animals took up to the cry of "Get out, Boxer, get out!" But the van was, already gathering speed and drawing away from them. So it was uncertain. It was uncertain whether Boxer had understood what Clover's had said. But a moment later, his face disappeared from the window, and then there was the sound of the tremendous drumming of the hoofs inside the van. He was trying to kick his way out. The time had been when a few kicks from the Boxer hoofs would have smashed the van into matchwoods, but alas, his strength had left him, and in a few moments the sound of the drumming hoof grew faintest and died away. In desperation, the animals began, appealing to the two horses, which drew the van to stop. Comrades, comrades, they shouted, don't take your own brothers to his death. But the stupid brutes, too ignorant to realize what was happening, merely set back their ears and quickened their pace. The Boxer face did not reappear at the windows. Too late, someone thought of racing ahead and shutting the 5 barricades gates, but in another moment the van was through it and rapidly disappearing down the road. Boxer was never seen again. 3 days later, it was announced that he had died in a hospital at the Wellingtons, in spite of receiving every attention a horse could have. Squealer came to announce the news to the others. He said, been present during Boxer's last hour. It was the most affecting sight I've ever seen, said Squealer, lifting his tortoise and wiping away a tear. I was at his besides at the very last, and that was almost too weak to speak. He whispered me in my ears that his sole sorrow was to have passed on before the windmill was finished. Forward, comrades, he whispered. Forward in the name of the rebellions. Long live Animal Farm. Long live Comrade Napoleon. Napoleon is always right. Those were his last words, comrades. Here Squealer demeanor suddenly changed. He fell silent for a moment, and his little eyes darted suspicious glances from side to side before he proceeded. It had come to his knowledge, he said, that a foolish and wicked rumor had been circulated at the time of Boxer's removal. Some of the animals had noticed that the van which took Boxer away was marked horse slaughters, and had actually jumped to the conclusion that Boxer was being sent to the knacker. It was almost unbelievable, and said Squealer, that any animal could be so stupid. Surely, he cried indignantly, whisking his tail and skipping from side to side. Surely they knew their beloved leader's comrade Napoleon better than that. But the explanation was really, really simple. The van had previously been the property of the knacker and had been bought by the veterinary surgeon who had not yet painted the old name out. That was how the mistake had arisen. The animals were enormously relieved to hear this, and when Squealer went on to give further graphic details of the Boxer's deathbed, the admirable care he had received, and the expensive medicines for which Napoleon had paid without a thought as to the cost. Their last words disappeared in the sorrow that they felt for their comrade that was tempted by the thought that at least he died happy. Napoleon himself appeared at the meeting on the following Sunday morning and pronounced a short orations and Boxer's honors. It had not been possible, he said, to bring back their lamented comrades' remains for the interments from the farms, but he had ordered a large wreath to be made from the laurels in the farmhouse gardens and set down to placed on Boxer's grave, and in a few days' time the Pigs intended to hold a memorial banquet in the Boxer's honors. Napoleon ended his speech with a reminder of Boxer's two favorite maxims. I will all work hardest, and Comrade Napoleon is always right. Maxims, he said. With every animal would do well to adopt as his own. So on the day appointed for the banquet, a grocer's man drove up from the Wellingtons and delivered a large wooden crate at the farmhouse. That night there was the sound of the uproarious singing, which was followed by what sounded like a violent quarrel and ended at about 11 o'clock with a tremendous crash of a glass. No one stirred in the farmhouse before noon on the following days, and the word went around that from somewhere or the other pigs had acquired the money to buy themselves another case of whiskey. Now, chapter number 10. Years passed, the season came and went, the short animal their lives fled away. A time came when there was no one who remembered the old days before the rebellions except Clover, Benjamin, Moses, the raven, and a number of pigs. Muriel was dead. Bluebell, Jesse, and Pincher were dead. Jones too was dead. He had died in in Barrett's home in another part of the country. Snowball was forgotten. Boxer was forgotten, except by a few who had known him. Clover was an old stout mare now, stiff in the joint and with a tendency to ruin my eyes. She was 2 years past the retiring age, but in fact, no animal had ever actually retired. So the talk of setting aside a corner of the pastures of the superannuated animals had long since been dropped. Napoleon was now a mature boar of 24 stone. Squealer was so fat that he could with difficulty see out of his eyes. Only old Benjamin was much the same as ever, except for being a little grayer about the muzzles, and since Boxer's death, more morose and taciturn than ever. There were many more creatures on the farm now, though the increase was not so great as had been expected in the early years. Many animals had been born to whom the rebellion was only at time traditions, passed on by word of mouth, and others had been brought who had never been mentioned such a thing before their arrival. The farm possessed 3 horses now, besides Clover. They were fine, upstanding beasts, willing workers, and good comrades, but very stupid. None of them improved, able to learn the alphabet before and the letter B. They accepted everything that they were told by the rebellion and then principles of animalism, especially from the Clover, for whom they had an almost filial respect, but it was doubtful whether they understood very much of it. The farm was more prosperous now and better organized. It had even been enlarged by 2 fields which had been brought from Mr. Pilkington's. The windmill had been successfully completed at last, and the farm possessed of threshing machines and a hay elevator of its own, and various new buildings had been added to it. Wimpers had bought himself a dog cart. The windmill, however, had not, after all, been used for generating electricity power. It was used for milling corn and brought in a handsome money profit. The animals were hard, at work building yet another mill. When that one was finished, so it was said that dynamos would be installed, but the luxuries of which Snowball had once taught the animals to dream, the stalls with electric lights and hot and cold waters, and the 3 day a week were no longer talked about. Napoleon had denounced such ideas as contrary to the spirit of animalism. The truest happiness, he said, lay in the working hard and living fully, frugally. Somehow it seems though the farm had grown richer without making the animals themselves any richer, except, of course, for the pigs and the dogs. Perhaps it was partly because there were so many pigs and so many dogs. It was not that these creatures did not work after their fashion. There was a Squealer was never tired of explaining and endless work in the supervisions and organization of the farm. Many of this work was a kind of that the other animals were too ignorant to understand. For example, Squealer told them that the pigs had to expend enormous labors every day upon mysterious things called files, reports, minutes, and memoranda. These were large sheets of papers which had to be closely covered with writings, and as soon as they were so covered, they were burned in the furnaces. This was the highest importance of the welfare of the farm. Squealer said, but still neither pigs nor dogs produce any food by their own labors, and there were many of them, and their appetites were really always good. As for the others, their life, so far as they knew, was as it had always been. They were generally hungry. They slept on straws. They drank from the pool. They labored in the fields. In winter, they were troubled by the cold, and in summer by the flies. Sometimes the older ones among them racked their dim memories and tried to determine whether in the early days of the rebellion, when Jones' expulsion was still recent, things had been better or worse than now. They could not remember. There were nothing with which they could compare their present lives. They had nothing to go upon except Squealer's list of figures, which invariably demonstrated that everything was getting better and better. So, and the animals found the problems insoluble. Any case, they had little time for speculating on such a things now. Only old Benjamin professed to remember every details of his long life and to know that things never had been nor could ever be much better or much worse. Hungry, hardship, and disappointments being so, he said, the unalterable law of life. And yet the animals never gave up hopes. More, they never lost, even for an instant, their sense of humor, their sense of honor. Okay, and privilege in being members of the animal farm. They were still the only farm in the whole country, whole county in all England owned and operated by animals. Not one of them, not even the youngest, not even the newcomers who had bought from the farm 10 or 20 miles away, were ever ceased to marvel at that. And when they heard the gun booming and saw the green flag fluttering at the mustang, their hearts swelled with imperishable pride, and the talk turned away towards the old heroic days, the expulsion of Jones, the writing of the Seven Commandments, the great battles in which the human invaders had been defeated. None of the old dreams had been abandoned. The republic of the animal, which Major had foretold, when the green fields of the England should be untrodden by the human feet, was still believed in. Someday it was coming. It might not be soon. It might not be within the lifetimes of any animals now living, but it was still coming. Even the tunes of Beast of England was perhaps hummed secretly here and there. At any rate, it was a fact that every animal on the farm knew it, though no one would have dared to sing it aloud. It might be that the lives were hard and that not all of their hopes had been fulfilled. But they were conscious that they were not as any other animals. If they went hungry, it was not from feeding tyrannical human beings. If they worked hard, at least they worked for themselves. No creatures among them went upon two legs. No creatures called any other creatures masters. All animals were equal. One day in early summer, Squealer ordered the sheep to follow him and let them out to a piece of a land grounds at the other ends from the farms, which had become overgrown with birch sapling. The sheep spent the whole day there browsing at the leaves under the Squealer's supervision. In the evening, he returned to the farmhouse himself, but as it was warm weather, he told the sheep to stay where they were. He rented them remaining there for a whole week, during which the time the other animals saw nothing of them. Squealer was with them for the greater part of every day. He said, teaching them to sing a new song for which privacy was needed. It was just after the ship had to return on a pleasant evening when the animals had finished work and were making their way back to the farm building that the terrified neighing of the horse sounded from the yard. Startled, the animals stopped their, and in their track. It was Clover's voice. She neighed against, and all the animals broke into gallop and rushed into the yard. Then, when they saw what Clover had seen, it was a pig walking on his, hind legs. Yes, it was Squealer, a little awkwardly as though not quite used to supporting his considerable bulk in that position, but with a perfect balance. He was strolling across the yard, and a moment later, out from the door of the farmhouse came a long files of pigs, all walking on their hind legs.
Hind.
It's a hind, okay, situated next to hind primarily refers to the function as genetic meaning situated at the back of the ear. Hind. Okay, just wait. Hind leg. Okay, hind leg refers to either of the two back legs located at the rear of the four-legged animals called quadrupeds. These limbs are primarily responsible for propelling. Okay, hind leg. Okay. This one. So all walking on their hind legs. Some did it better than others, and one or two were even a trifle unsteady and looked as though they would have liked the support of a stick. But every one of them made his way right around the yard successfully, and finally there was a tremendous baying of our dogs and shrill crowing them from the back cockerels, and out came Napoleon himself, majestically upright, casting haughty glance from side to side, and with his dogs gambolling around him. He carried a whip in his trotter. There was a deadly silence, amazed, terrified, huddling together. The animals watched the long line of pigs march slowly around their yard. It was as though the world has turned upside down. Then there came a moment when the first shock had worn off, and when, in spite of everything, in spite of the terror of the dogs and the habit developed through long years of never complaining, never criticizing, no matter what happened, they might have uttered some words of the protest. But just at that moment, as though it at a signal, all the sheep burst out into a tremendous fleeting of four legs good, two legs better. Okay, four legs good, two legs better, four legs good, two legs better, four legs good, two legs better. It went on for 5 minutes without stopping, and by the time the sheep had quieted down, the chances to utter any protest had passed, for the pigs had marched back into the farmhouse. Benjamin felt a nose nuzzling at his shoulder. He looked around. It was Clover. Her old eyes looked dimmer than ever. Without saying anything, she tugged gently at his mane and led him round to be the round of end of the big barn. Where the seven commandments were written. For a minute or two, they stood gazing at the tattered wall with its white lettering. My sight is, failing, she said finally. Even I was a young, I could not have read what was written there. but it appears to me that that wall looked different. Are the seven commandments the same as they used to be, Benjamin? For once, Benjamin consented to break his rule, and he read out to her what was written on the wall. There was nothing there now except a single commandment, and it ran, all animals are equal. Okay, so only one single commandment. All animals are equal. But some animals are more equal than others. Okay, so it was written all animals are equal, and some animals are more equal than others. All animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. After that, it did not seem strange when the next day the pigs were supervising the work of the farm, all carried whips in their tortoise. It did not seem strange to learn that the pigs had brought themselves a wireless set, were arranging to install telephone, and had taken out subscription to John Bull's Tidbits and the Daily Mirror. It did not seem strange when Napoleon was seen strolling in the farmhouse garden with a pipe in his mouth. Not even when the pigs took Mrs. Jones' clothes out of the wardrobes and put them on. Napoleon himself appearing in a black coat, rat catcher breeches, and leather leggings, while his favorite so appeared in the watered silk dress which Mrs. Jones had been used to wearing on Sundays. A week later, in the afternoon, a number of dogs' car drove up to the farm. A deputation of neighboring farmers had been invited to make a tour of inspection. They were shown all over the farm and expressed a great admiration of everything they saw, especially the windmills. The animals were weeding the turnip field. They worked diligently hard, hardly raising their faces from the ground and not knowing whether to be more frightened to the pigs or of the human visitors. That evening, loud laughter and burst of singing came from the farming house, and eventually, and how suddenly the sound of the mingled voices, the animals were stricken with curiosity. What could have been, what could be happening in there now that for the first time animals and humans were meeting on terms of equality? With one accord, they began to creep as quietly as possible into the farmhouse gardens. At the gate, they paused, half frightened to go on, but Clover led the way in. They tiptoed up to the house, and such animals as were tall enough peered in at the dining room window. There, round the long table, sat half a dozen farmers and half a dozen of more eminent pigs. Napoleon himself occupying the seat of the honor at the head of the table. The pigs appeared completely at ease in their chairs. The company had been enjoying a game of cards, had broken off for the animals, but broken off for the moment, evidently in order to drink a toast. A large jug was circulating, and the mugs were being refilled with the beers. No one noticed that the wondering faces of the animals that gazed in the window. I repeat, all the animals are equal, but some animals are more equal than others. Okay. Mr. Pilkington of the Foxwood had stood up, his mug in his hands. In a moment, he said he would ask the present company to drink a toast, but before doing so, there were a few words that he felt it incumbent upon to him to say. It was a source of great satisfaction to him, he said, and he was sure to all the other present to feel that a long period of mistrust and misunderstanding had now come to an end. There had been a time, not that he or any of the present company had shared such sentiments, but there had been a time when the respected proprietors of the animals farm had been regarded, would not say with his hostility, but perhaps with a certain measures of misgiving by the human neighbors. But unfortunate incident occurred. A mistaken idea had been current. It had been felt that the existence of a farm owned and operated by the pigs was somehow abnormal and was liable to have an unsettling effect in the neighborhoods. Too many farmers had assumed, without a due inquiry, that one such farmer's spirit of license and indisciplines would prevail. They had been nervous about the effect upon their hands-on animals and or even upon their human employees, but all such doubts were now dispelled. Today he and his friends had visited for Animal Farm and inspected every inch of it with their own eyes, and what they did find, not only the most up-to-date methods, but a discipline and orderliness which should be an example to all the farmers everywhere. He believed that he was right in saying that the lower animals and saying that the lower animals on Animal Farm did more work and received less food than any animal in the county. Indeed, he and his fellow visitors today had observed many features which they intended to introduce on their own farm immediately. He would end his remark, he said, by emphasizing once again the friendly feeling that subsisted and ought to subsist between animals and farms and its neighbor, between pigs and human beings. There was not, and there need not be any clash of interest whatever. The struggle and their difficulties was not the labor problem the same everywhere. Here it became apparent that Mr. Pilkington was about to spring some carefully prepared witticisms on the company, but for a moment he was too overcome by the amusement to be able to utter it. After much cooking and choking, during which his various chins turned purple, he managed to get it out. If you have your lower animals to contend with, he said, we have our lower classes. This bon mot set the table in a row, and Mr. Pilkington once again congratulated the pigs on the low rations and long hours and the general absence of pampering which he had observed on Animal Farm. And now he had said finally he would ask the company to rise to their feet and make certain that their glasses were full. Gentlemen, concluded Mr. Pilkington, gentlemen, I give you a toast to the prosperity of an Animal Farm. There was enthusiastic cheering and stamping of feet. Napoleon was so gratified that he left his place and came round the table to clink his mug against Mr. Pilkington before emptying it. When the cheering had died down, Napoleon, who had remained on his feet, intimated that he too had a few words to say. Like all the Napoleon speeches, it was short and to the point. He too, he said, was happy that period of misunderstanding was at the end. For a long time, there had been rumors circulated. He had reasons to think by some malignment enemy that there was something subversive and even revolutionary in the outlook of himself and his colleague. They had been credited with attempting to stir up rebellion amongst the animals on the neighboring farms. Nothing could be further from the truth. The sole wish now in the past was to live at peace and a normal relation with the neighbors. This farm, which he had the honor to control, he added, was a cooperative enterprise. The the title deeds which were in his possessions were owned by the pigs jointly. He did not believe, he said, that any of the old suspicions still lingered, but certain changes had been made recently in the routines of the farm, which should have the effect of the promoting confidence still further. Hitherto, the animals on the farm had rather a foolish custom of addressing one another as comrades. This was to be suppressed. There had also been a very strange custom whose origin was unknown of marching every Sunday morning past a poor skull which was nailed to a post in the garden. This too would be suppressed, and the skull had already been buried. So visitors might have observed too the green flag which flew from the mastheads. If so, they would perhaps have noted that the white hoof and the horn with which it had previously been marked had now been removed. It would be a plain green flag from now onwards. He had only one criticism, so he said, to make of Mr. Pilkington's excellent and neighboring suite. Mr. Pilkington had referred throughout to an animal farm. He could not, of course, know, for he, Napoleon, was only for now the first time announcing it, that the name Animal Farm had been abolished. Henceforward, the farm to be known as the Manor Farm, which he believed was its correct and original name. Gentlemen, concluded Napoleon, I will give you the same toast as before, but in different forms, to fill your glasses to the brim. Gentlemen, here's my toast, to the prosperity of the Manor Farm. There was the same hearty cheering as before, and the mugs were empty to the dregs. But as the animal outside gazed to the scene, it seemed to them that some strange things was happening. What was it that had altered in the face of the pigs? Clover's did old-time eyes fitted from one face to another. Some of them had 5 chins, some had 4, some had 3. But what was it that seems to be melting and changing? Then the applause having come to an end, the company took up their cards and continued the game that had been interrupted, and the animals kept silently away. But they had not gone 20 yards when they stopped short. An uproar of voices was coming from the farmhouse. They rushed back and looked through the window again. Yes, a violent quarrel was in progress. There was a shouting, banging on the table, sharp suspicion, glances, furious denial. The source of the trouble appeared to be that Napoleon and Mr. Pilkington had each played an ace of spades simultaneously. 12 voices were shouting in anger, and they were all alike, no question. Now, what had happened to the faces of the pigs? The creatures outside looked from pig to a man, and now from man to a pig, and from pig to a man again, but already it was impossible to say which was which. Okay, I'll repeat. 12 voices were shouting in anger, and they were all alike. Okay, so yeah, he's saying that everyone looks similar. Okay, 12 voices were shouting in anger, and they were all alike. No question. Now, what had happened to the faces of the pigs? The creatures outside looked from pig to a man, and from man to a pig, and from pig to a man again, but already it was impossible to say which was it. Okay, so I think I've reached the end, and it was a beautiful written novel by George Orwell, and I do think that he has actually summarized the human, or it doesn't matter, right? It's like the greed, it just comes in, the wanting for more, the power, and yeah, that's the thing. It's a beautiful description of, I'm not exactly sure how accurate it is of the the based on the Joseph Stalin, but I would think so that this could normally happen in a society, right? They will just completely, because most of the normal people, right, the public, the normal people, they're not very smart.
I'm talking about on an average. Some could be very smart, but on an average, some are not very smart, and most of them are very ignorant of the fact of what is happening. So then, obviously, the public relations or the communicators of the leaders, they will obviously try their rhetorics, their persuasion skills to to persuade the common people and to believing that everything is hunky dory, which in actual could be completely opposite. And that's how the leader they remain in power. And yeah, so now at the end you could see I was actually expecting a happy ending, but no, it wasn't, right? Now at the end, what they feared of Mr. Jones was exactly what the pigs were doing, right? So yeah, this is Tenzin Wese, and it's been a wonderful read. Thank you.